So item 1 will now be new item, would be development impact fees, approval of a list of public facilities capital needs. Palo, were you going to kick off the presentation?
I'm just going to turn it over to Walter Rossman, our OMB director,
Great.
to do the presentation.
Welcome, Walter.
And it's actually the draft use of good evening. It's the draft use of fee policy we go to first. If you don't mind, Chair. First.
So we're going to do 2 first.
So we're switching 1 to 3,
Okay.
if that's okay with you.
Sure.
Agreement to you. So thank you very much. Good evening, Honorable Chair and council members. I just want to bring a quick background on the use of fee policy we discussed 2 months ago in September, recap the direction the committee gave to staff, quickly summarize the report, and talk about next steps. So in September, what we did is we brought in policy considerations for use of fee policy, for draft use of fee policy, and we brought you also a report from the consultant regarding the cost recovery levels of fees, looking at FY 2012 data. Based on that, the discussion which we had at the time with the committee directed us to come back in November with a draft use of fee cost recovery level policy, which you want to have another look at it, and that's attached to the report. It pretty much contains the same information you've seen before. There's no updates to that, as well as the committee asked to talk about the March discussion which we had about the cost components for fees. So that's also in the report. This committee felt that's part of the things which the full council hasn't seen yet. We want to take another look at that before it gets forward to the council. So that's what the recommendation is for you today. The draft cost components pretty much talk about what's in the fee when we establish the fees. Well, we'll establish those fees, which is part of the FY 2015 proposed municipal fee schedule. We will look at the salary and benefits schedule, average salary for a classification. We'll look at the time a person takes to work on a fee-related activity. Then we add a % for the compensated absences, and that's calculated based on about 1,600, as we would say in accounting, productive hours versus 480 non-productive hours. What I mean with what's non-productive is vacation, sick leave, time an employee spent in trainings or meetings, which a manager may have to do, and it's not directly related to executing an activity related to fees. Then we add the cost allocation plan and the overhead for the department, the department management, as well as citywide support costs, which would be a cost to hire an employee, to pay the payroll, do the procurement as it's related to the fee activity. It's a standard methodology which we use in the city, and I reviewed it, and we already established for the next budget process. Then that's the fee, and then we add non-salary costs to it, if there are any. That really becomes in the fee, which is assessed, should be assessed to an applicant for a permit or for an alarm permit fee or whatever it may be. It's many fees it has. Then becomes the issue really of cost recovery level, which is what does it cost us to do the fee versus what we are charging today for the fee. And that's something which the council hasn't really seen yet. Where if it's published the municipal fee schedule in the past, we have not given you that information. I think that's a crucial information which the committee identified last time. We would like to see first before the council staff comes back with a final and cost recovery level policy, which we plan to do in summer next year. And then you'll see the entire context. What's the policy say and how actually we establish the fees related to the cost recovery level. The last thing I would like to add quickly, I mentioned to you that we had some fees which were identified in the MGT report, the consultant report, which were above cost recovery levels. We looked at those fees, and the next finance committee meeting on September 19th will bring those forth to you. We have to make some adjustments to fees which are above cost recovery levels. We bring this forth to you because we still have to figure out what's the how do we implement any kind of changes when we have a discussion with legal at this time. Lastly, I also mentioned in the report that we are looking as part of the proposed budget process. Councilmember Schmidt talked about this. What this really costs you every year to increase, what's it cost to the city on salaries and benefits and related costs, and what's the increase for the next fiscal year. We're still working on that as part of establishing the base budget and forecast, but we are currently, it's 3 to 4%, as mentioned in the report. It may be different once I'm done with the calculation with my staff, and then we consider increasing potentially all fees across the board. We're leaving the way it is. It all depends what's the budgetary issue we have at the time, if a shortfall, what if a surplus, what if there's a surplus, what's the amount of the surplus, et cetera, et cetera. But I just want to make you aware of that. With that, based on discussion and approval today, we'll modify the report or the draft user fee policy, and then request to move this forward to the full council. That concludes my report.
Thank you. Colleagues, first, we don't have any cards from members of the public, so we can have both questions and comments. Councilmember Burton.
So a couple of questions. The first one had to do with, I think it's kind of on page 2 at the top. You say, just in regards to the scheduling, you say that you plan on staff will review and potentially update the draft policy and submit a final version for Finance Committee review and approval in fall of 2015?
That's correct.
Okay, so we're talking about 2 years out.
Or
fall 2014.
Apologies.
Okay.
Thank you very much. Yes, I was
It's-
fiscal year 15, but you're thinking it's
Yeah.
fiscal 15.
Yeah.
That's 2014.
Perfect.
I'll correct that.
Thank you. And then, so before I ask a couple of questions, I mean, I just want to confirm, all we're being asked to do today and kind of all that's on our plate is reviewing the user fee cost recovery level policy, and deciding whether or not it's in a good enough place to kick it up to the full council for a broader discussion, but not necessarily getting into the weeds on, a lot of the different fees and percentages and that type of thing.
That is correct. I just attached the report from September to this report. In case you move it forward to the council, you will see the entire package the council will receive.
Got it.
That is correct, yes.
Perfect. So on the user fee cost recovery level policy, I had a couple of questions. Could you maybe just extrapolate a little bit on number 2, which is the service recipient versus packet page 56, which is the service recipient versus service driver concept?
Sure. So the service recipient would be somebody who, for building permit, who gets the house remodeled, makes an addition, and that's the recipient of the service. But the driver per se is the building code, and the benefit of the building code, the way it's established, to ensure that we have fire protection built in the buildings which we're building today, or earthquake protection. So that's the difference between the driver, who is the code, and the reasons for the change in the requirements of the code, versus the recipient, who is the individual benefiting from that.
Gotcha. And then on consistency with goals and with city goals and policies, we say, for example, fee levels can be set to promote healthy habits, facilitate environmental stewardship, or discourage certain actions, e.g. false alarms. What does false alarms mean?
Okay, it would be false alarms. Somebody
You don't
has
have
a...
You don't have a, haven't ever gotten dinged for that, huh?
No.
So a lot of residents choose to have an alarm system built into the house.
Okay.
And that system obviously has at times, and probably more often than not, false alarms.
Gotcha.
To trigger either the call system, a pet, or whatever it may be. And so the police department responds to that. That obviously costs money.
Gotcha.
And so you want to try to restrict that behavior and try to build some other safeguards.
So it's literally false alarms.
False alarms.
Gotcha.
It's exponential on our SEA reports.
Oh yeah. So I'm gonna, just for purposes of kind of kicking us off and moving things along, I'm gonna make a motion to direct staff to bring forward to the full council the attached draft user fee cost recovery level policy for city council discussion. And I'm sure there might be some edits along the way, but just to kind of get that ball rolling, I'll make that motion.
Second?
Would you like to speak to it?
I think this is incredibly helpful in putting into context, the different percentage fees that we're trying to recover from the community. I was comforted by the fact that, as this line says, it's important to note that these groupings provide policy guidance and are not absolute. Somewhere else I saw a similar term that, showed that, this is guidance, and that different tweaks can be made to different fees for different services. But this is kind of a bigger picture thing that helps staff, put a lot of these into bigger groupings, and then we can tweak it from there.
Vice Mayor.
Thank you. Yes, this is really probably something I think Pat said it before, when we were looking at this, that this is a great tool to the way you've encapsulated how we're going to process this type of information. And and kind of what is the tipping point as to when it's, something that is just, I know we haven't established our core values, but just sort of valuable to the community, and so the community wants to do certain types of subsidies and therefore feels that they want to be able to take a look at that bundle, and analyze that. And yet other things, it's like, nope, this is the cost, this is the way it is, and write your check and let's get going, and you can do your project and we can fund our department off of that. So my one question, though, was on page 56 on item number 2. You have building permit or a massage establishment permit applicant, and I really didn't care for that. So I was wondering, before it comes to full council, if you could...
We can give you another example.
Yeah, that's just a little, we don't need that one, I think, on this one. And then the...
A hot tub establishment.
If you can just, come up with something that's
Sure.
maybe more...
And I was thinking more about the spa, which is just a few blocks away
Happy
from
Feet?
here.
Yeah.
To be honest with you, but
Yeah, well, we had the Happy Feet scenario a little while, was that last year, or I can't remember if it
I
was
wasn't
this
here.
year. Okay, so last year. Then on page 54, I do like the way that you are outing the fact that you are not doing square footage, which clearly is probably a cost for commercial enterprises that might do similar services to ours. And so I don't mind having that not this time in the composition of how we're doing our cost component, but I think it's good to note that you've done this so that if we ever want to reconsider that for whatever reason, if finance and council wants to go there and consider maybe this is a way to recapture infrastructure funding or something, maybe we can go there, but I don't think we're prepared to go there right now. I think this is a big somersault with how you're doing your costing for these baseline measurements that we're doing right now.
And
how you're capturing.
just to clarify, this is the actual workspace and persons working in?
Yes.
Okay.
It's as though I were to rent office space and do it, or if I rented the gymnasium to do it. It's like we still are not charging for that, and very often, our community centers, when Mitchell opens, it'll be different, but most of ours are really not up to the modern technology anyway. So I think that is part of the common good of the community, that we have those types of buildings and structures too. So, but I have noted it, and I appreciate the fact that you did put this in here so that you kind of carved it out for us to take a look at.
Sure.
for this particular policy.
Councilmember Sharp?
Let me start with a simple question on that second page, cost component. Element here is retiree health. That doesn't show up here. This is equivalent to $30 million, 20% of our total budget. And where does retiree health show up?
Sure. The way we establish the base budget, we take this part, I believe that's correct, correct me. Now there's a question which is probably a new one to me. It's just the other day, today I talked to staff, that's something I still need to figure out. Okay, so I believe the way it's built, what we do is we take the cost and distribute it over each salary as a benefit, and that's how we recapture the cost. So that's how this gets into the fee. So though it's retiree
So
health.
it's allocated to current employees.
Correct.
So the salary gets multiplied by the percentage of the first pension rate to come up with the...
Okay, so it is included.
It is.
Yeah, it is included, what portion of it is collected as part of the policy decision,
Yeah.
right?
Okay, good. On the cost recovery policy statement,
Mm-hmm.
I agree with Councilmember Berman. I had a little trouble with number 2 and the description. Maybe you could just take a look at that and see if there's a way of wording the description so it's a little clearer.
Okay.
Now, the other thing that caught my attention in the policy statement was the figure or diagram you had there, talking about what cost recovery levels.
What page are you on?
It's on page 57
Of the packet.
of the packet.
Right.
Yeah. And there are the considerations. The considerations, I was thinking the group that came in with the lowest score was a community services at 30%, so they qualify under the low. And I looked down the 5 bullets you had there and scratched my head a little bit and say, gee, there's none of those that really describe what community services is doing. You know, they serve low income, but they also serve everybody. And it seems to me we need another bullet there to really capture the flavor of what community services is doing. And maybe I'll ask the maker of the motion whether we could add a suggestion in there, something like widespread participation of a diverse community in healthy activities, educational activities, something that captures what community services is doing.
Just to add, you and most of the community services seem to be in the 0 to 30% range, or we're saying that would be the policy.
If you look at the page of community services, it comes out to an average of 30%.
Which page?
Which is in the attachment, all the way in the back. I just want to add one thing, Councilmember Schmidt.
Yes.
That is correct, and that summary page has information there where we look at the rent, for instance, of facilities, and the facility was partially closed. So I think probably more between the 30 and 70% for cost recovery level. So I think this report is slightly misleading the way the data was presented to you by the consultant, the way it rolled up. So it's correct individually, but as it rolls up, there's some other facts hidden in there which bring the cost recovery level down. So, so for me, the community services in general felt right into the middle one. That's why even myself had a tough time defining this. I was struggling with that. And I looked at also what other cities have done, and the consensus has been across the city, which may not be the right approach here, is to sort of let fall within the medium level and taking a little bit from low, because we're looking at seniors and youth, we're subsidizing them, versus high, which definitely is not, there may be an individual benefit to a participant. However, it is also Palo Alto's belief that these kind of services, whether it's arts classes or science classes, education classes, should be subsidized by the general fund.
I guess page 75, there it says community services 30%.
That's correct.
That's a nice summary table. But you'll have a new.
We'll have a new one. That's correct.
Okay.
So that's why.
I guess my point is not the 30 or the 35, but what is captured.
How can we
in the
capture it? I get it. I understand.
The general idea.
Yeah,
Kind
the
of.
positive sense. Of
Yeah.
community
Yeah, we can do that.
services.
I think it's a great idea.
But I think
Yep. Works for me. I don't know if Nancy needs to.
No, I'm fine.
I guess the last comment I have goes to that table that you were just referring to, the detailed table on page 94 of community services. And I remember we had a little discussion of this last time, but they range in recovery from 1% to 99%.
Correct.
And there's nothing that prepares you in the policy statement for why is this 99 and this 1? So just maybe this isn't the time to talk about that.
So I think by overlaying, going through the FY15 proposed fee process, figuring out what the cost recovery levels are by groupings, let's say for CSD, and seeing that what they really are, then I think we'll have a better way then of looking at the final policy and addressing this issue.
Yeah.
So I think what I feel like we're struggling with is we don't have full information in front of us. We're dealing with old information from fiscal year 12, which has certain assumptions built into it, and we're looking at a policy in somewhat in isolation,
Yeah.
a draft policy.
So tonight, we're trying to get the policy statement down, and then it will be a policy.
And then we'll definitely want to incorporate these considerations we're putting forth into the staff report to the city council, so the council is aware what kind of issues you have raised here.
Yeah.
at that point, you may decide to direct us to go do surveys with the community, put more factors into whether the community wants these programs to continue, how they value the programs. So there's more to come to the story of each of the fees.
Yeah, I understand. Good. Thank you.
Sure.
So I think Councilmember Schmidt's questions provoke further discussion, because there's a bit of an iterative process between trying to sculpt a policy that would guide the particular, or help inform the decisions on recoveries, and then looking at the examples and see how they might comply or be consistent with a prospective policy. And I recall that when we last talked about this, there's some that just stand out as suggesting that we have a little bit of struggle still remaining on figuring out how to describe this. They stand out in ways that may help guide us once we have a policy to realign fees. But if we go to packet page 94, which is in attachment B that Councilmember Schmidt was referring to, if you look at visual arts for youth and visual arts for adults, the cost recovery is 65% for youth and 29% for adults. For dance, youth, the recovery is 88%, for adults 31%. For recreation, it's 50% for adults and 99% for youth. I'm trying to get, how did we ever get in a circumstance where we made a community value decision where we would essentially highly subsidize adult arts and recreation, and in similar circumstances not do so for youth? On the other hand, some of the other programs are specifically for youth that are highly subsidized. So out of balance, when we look at the totality of youth services in the community, it's not so tilted. But when we look at some particular categories, it is tilted in an odd way. So, we have children's theater and the junior museum. Those things are youth-oriented. Although the community theater, which is governed by a long-term policy where council more than several decades ago, 2 decades or more ago, stopped subsidizing community theater and instead simply said, we won't charge you for the facility, but you're spun off as a nonprofit. And we've done that kind of thing in the community. Avenidas, we have a senior center that is, unlike many communities, the senior center is not funded principally by the city and run by the city. It's an independent nonprofit. So we have hybrids here, and I don't mean to oversimplify this by bringing out a couple of these examples. But I also wanted to make sure that as we have asked you to try to come up with recommended language that would capture the values that we're trying to embrace under these categories, in particular around the community services, that somehow what we propose would be consistent with, if not where we've been, at least where we're headed.
And I agree with you. And let me just speak to your examples. I tripped over this example as well. And here's what happens, how we pretty prospectively look at fees. We look at the cost, we estimate a certain amount of activity levels, and that estimated activity level, especially in the class environment. If you have a science class with 20 students, the cost per student is obviously lower than with 10 students. You have a much higher participation level with youth programs than with adult programs. So what happens here with actual data, you actually look at the actual revenue, the actual cost, and obviously if you have more participation, the revenue is higher, the cost recovery level is higher, because the cost is constant. And with adults, you understand what I'm saying?
I thought it's the opposite. So the cost recovery with youth is lower.
No, in this case, it's youth, it's 88%. Didn't you say it's just right now?
Oh,
65.
I'm sorry, yes, the cost recovery is higher. Okay, I see, okay.
So for adults, it's 29%.
So because we have a higher participation, somewhat paradoxically, we have a higher cost recovery.
That's correct. It's a fixed cost for providing a class.
Mm-hmm.
And so this is what happens. We're looking at actual data. Usually what you do when you set fees, you look prospectively at budgeted estimates as budgeted costs, and you set the fees accordingly based on what you estimate the activity to be. And so with that, that's why you dial in the cost recovery levels, because you look back and said, usually a class is 20 students, costs me that much, so therefore I think I can bring, if I want a cost recovery of 70%, the cost to the resident, to the participant should only be that much. So therefore that's why I'm very hesitant. I think the report has been very useful to us. I think it provided a lot of insight to us, but I'm hesitant to use it as a guiding factor for moving forward from a cost recovery level perspective.
Mm-hmm. And I think that's well aligned with what we've said. It's informative. It's not going to stipulate.
That's correct.
How we set the structures. It will inform. Okay. Any other comments or comments? No. In that case, all in favor? Aye. That passes unanimously. And now we'll move to the next item on the confusing agenda.
I think this is the only one that's actually aligned.
So we're going to number 2?
We're going to do number 2, please.
Gotcha.
The development impact fees. As we had mentioned to you, first of all, let me introduce myself, Lalo Perez, Chief Financial Officer. As we had mentioned to you, we were looking at our various fees and doing updates, and one of them was the cost of service study, and the second one is the development impact fees. And so we're now in front of you. I'm going to be working up the slides, so you should have your places related to development impact fees. Development impact fees are levied on development of new projects, both for residential and commercial. And there's some exceptions to these projects. For example, residential remodels or expansions are exempt. A total tear down is not. Just to give you an illustration there. There are certain categories of nonprofits that are also exempt, as well as commercial spaces under 1,500 square feet. This is designed to allow agencies to recapture the additional cost of services required as a result of the new development. So we're trying to capture the incremental cost. We're trying to capture the incremental cost and collect it through these fees. Going to the next slide. This fee can only be applied to capital costs. So, if we get the question, can we use it for traffic demand management? If it's not capital related, the answer is no. So that's an example. When implemented, it must have a nexus study to perform. Nate Perez, who's here from GTA, will give you a presentation and we'll get into more of the details about that. The reason for the nexus is that we have to show that the proposed fee is appropriately scaled to match the likely increase in costs. Moving on to the next slide. These are the fees that have an impact. Excuse me, these are the development impact fees that we have in the city. I'm on slide number 4. And it has parks, community centers, libraries, affordable housing, transportation, parkland dedication, and then for traffic, we have it in particular zones only. And excuse me if I read the slides, but we don't have a presentation on the projection, so for those at home, they probably want to hear what I'm saying instead of saying, read what's on the slide. Why a capital needs list? DT&A will update us on the transportation fees, and we're proposing a new fee, a public safety, and then a second one, general facility, government facility fee. The reason we're updating only the transportation fees is because the other ones are at the appropriate levels in the preliminary review that we conducted. So the list of capital needs will be used to calculate and update the proposed new fee. And that's why we need to have that list in front of you tonight and to be reviewed and approved. There's no need to have the council approve it, but it could be a step that we may want to consider, or you as a committee may want to consider, to make sure that your colleagues have a fair chance to review the list. Our list that you have attached in our report is longer than the Infrastructure Committee project list, and you just recently looked at it as a council. And the reason is because the Infrastructure Committee focused on projects that were prioritized that have no funding. On this view that we have, you're allowed to include projects that are conceivably going to be done within this period of time that we're looking at. And so you have a little more flexibility. Projects that you may not have identified as a priority as a council in the infrastructure can be included in here and be captured as part of the fee structure. The capital list includes projects funded primarily through the CIP budget on a pay-as-you-go basis. What we're required to do for any revenue that we identified that is going to be offsetting the cost, that we reduce that. So we would only be adding the net cost of that particular project. So if we partially fund something in our 5-year project, we would only put the delta into the project list. It's a snapshot in time of projects that we would like to consider. As you're well aware, there's a direction to go and do another survey with the community, and let's assume that some direction would come and we were to be successful in receiving potential new funding for projects that are also included on the list. We would make an adjustment for such at a later point in time. So for now, we would have to assume that they're not approved and not funded, and that's why you might see some projects on the list. Let me take a break here and not go into the timeline quite yet, and have Nate Perez go over his slides that are also at your places in the darker green color.
Perfect. Well, good evening, council members. My name is Nate Perez. I'm a vice president at David Taussig & Associates, also goes by DTA. I'm an attorney by trade, but I do public finance now, and we help communities fund, figure out ways to fund capital improvements and municipal services. So I've been working with Lalo, Joe, Brad, Nancy. I've also had a lot of contact with all the various departments at the city through various surveys. So a lot of input went into that list. Just to start with my slides, I like to start with what development impact fees are not, because there's quite often a lot of confusion. I noticed we were talking about user fees today, cost allocation plans. I do a bit of that myself. There tends to be some overlap. People think one or the other. It's a very, very different methodology. So development impact fees, as you can see, not permitting fees, not processing fees, not plan check fees. As Lalo noted, sort of skip some points that Lalo already covered, but it's not, you cannot use them to cure existing deficiencies or for operations and maintenance. So we're strictly capital. And that's usually sort of a 5-year useful life, or longer is the standard that we're looking at. Next slide, what are development impact fees? Again, Lalo already sort of noted that. They're a function of California law, passed in 1987. AB 1600 demands that these are exactions from the development community. I mean, that's what they are. I mean, it's the legal term, and it demands a certain level of proportionality and nexus if you're going to exact that money from the development community. The methodologies proposed for nexus can be difficult. They can be trip ends, calls for service, sewer toilet flushes, really anything under the sun. But that depends upon the given fee category that we're analyzing at that time.
Can I ask a
Please.
question that goes at this point?
Sure.
At the bottom paragraph of the staff, at the bottom paragraph of the staff report, page 1, it says, by definition, a fee is voluntary and must be reasonably related to the cost of the service provided by agency. Can you comment on this voluntary aspect?
I know the city is currently involved with their housing fee in the Sterling case, and as are many cities in the South Bay and across California with their housing fees. Voluntary is certainly a term of art. The exactions are made legal by AB 1600. It was a development community-oriented bill, and
Well, we don't have to collect these fees if we don't want to, though.
oh, correct, yeah.
So it's voluntary on our side.
Is that what it's referring to? That who has the volition to do this? Us or those that we charge the fees to? Who's that referring
The voluntary comment is referring that to the development community. It's a little tongue-in-cheek now that I see it there, because they do have to pay the fees to get their building permit. Legally speaking, they could always just not move forward with the building permit.
That's what.
Yeah.
Yeah,
That's,
Yeah.
okay.
Says.
Yeah, it's voluntary with several asterisks, and
Like
probably
that
it tells us,
rewrite.
yes, absolutely.
Okay. All right, so that's,
Yeah.
that's a clarification.
Sorry about that.
Okay.
That is the direct definition, so I will note that for next time. The slide, next slide with the bar graphs, this is an interesting slide. The first part of our work was the city asked that we sort of provide a comparative survey of peer cities in the South Bay. This study, this graph is both illuminating and sort of really vexing. Development impact fees are a little bit like sort of an inverse Lake Wobegon. Like everyone wants to be average, but no one is really sort of committed to rolling. Well, a few cities are, but not many are committed to rolling back their fees to be average. So we looked at the South Bay communities. I think there's a lot of consistency there. These are all-in fees, somewhere between $30,000 and $40,000 per single-family dwelling unit. I think this is very common. I do not think, in my professional opinion, that it inhibits your attractiveness to the development community at all. Palo Alto is a very hot market. People want to be here. They're going to pay this fee. Obviously, the development community would stand up and say, well, maybe not, but I don't think a small change in any one of these fees would impact that. This is compared to, say, in places in the Central Valley, Sacramento County, where you see fees of $60,000 per home, which is amusing because the homes are worth so much less, and the developers make so much less profit. But I think they are manageable. I think they're a little on the high side. The black and white, so you guys have it there. You can see the water fee is doing a lot of the damage for you guys. That's the blue one. You updated that a couple years ago. It's a significant fee. But your other fees, your capital.
What are you talking about, the water?
The blue, it's the blue.
No, I know that, but what fee is that? That's not our utility, is that?
No.
That's for the sewer hookup, water sewer hookup.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, for a new home. So they would pay, usually fees are broken, the development impact impact fees are sort of an umbrella. Within that, there are typically housing fees, transportation fees, water and sewer fees, and then capital facilities fees. And those would be parks, libraries, community centers, and things like that. And in that final category, you guys are very competitive, not low. So.
But we do collect affordable housing fee, and how come that's not showing up on here?
That is because it's an in lieu fee, and it's a little. There is no real apples to apples comparison. We tried the best we could, but a developer who builds one single family home is not necessarily conditioned to pay an affordable housing fee. So
You build it or you pay it is what.
Yeah, correct. So
other people have.
Other people's have different triggers, and it's not always clear whether you build it, you pay it. Sometimes you build it and you pay it.
Right.
Sometimes you build and you pay it when you have more than 50 parcels. So there's a lot of nuance in those bar graphs. We tried to reflect. For instance, Santa Clara just really didn't cooperate. I mean, I'm sure they have more fees than that. They just didn't cooperate at the time. So
I'm sorry if I might interrupt. If they didn't cooperate, let's not include them in the presentation, because
Absolutely.
that ends up skewing the.
Being an outlier. Yeah. And then also the black one that Fremont has for capital facility fees. How do they collect that?
I believe that is actually very similar to sort of the general government fee that I'm proposing for municipal services buildings and things such as that. I think that would be a good fee for the city of Palo Alto to start collecting.
I have one other question on this graph. And I don't know, Lala, whether you'd be the better person or who. Can you remind us on the drivers behind the scale of the water sewer hookup fee? Because,
Nate.
Nate, excuse me. As Nate mentioned, without that, or if that was more aligned with other cities, then we would be at or below the median. And so that's the big nugget out of all of this.
Yep.
And can you remind me what drives that to be so much higher for us than for other cities?
I don't have the specifics of that in front of me. I remember we looked at the, I think it was about 5 years ago, where we last looked at it and established the range and accepted the percentage. But I don't recall off the top of my head.
Okay, well,
But
we
it's
can
something
have
we
this
can-
discussion,
yeah.
but as we dive deeper into this, I mean, my feeling is, I would like to see us have park fees comparable to other cities and not be inhibited from doing that because we have such a high water hookup fee, but we'll
Yeah.
continue that discussion.
I would suspect that the water fee, high cost of the new water system, may possibly, I know Palo Alto is obviously very, very built out.
We're on
The extension of the water pipes may take you sort of new, elements of the city that aren't previously served quite as well,
Yeah,
maybe?
well, I was thinking that it's more that we didn't have the reservoirs and we were, building up to the reservoir, but I have to look into it
And
to give you
also-
more specifics.
We've had two major capital categories. One is the Hetch-Hetchy system
Mhm.
being completely rebuilt, and the second is our emergency water supplies. I don't know whether that's what's driving this.
Yeah, because we didn't have the funding when the fee was established, as you may recall, it wasn't built out until later
In
into a
that
bond.
case, based on what I thought was your constraints on these, is that they can't be retrospective. And so we can't be charging, once the thing is complete, we can't charge new hookups for something that's already there, is that correct?
No, the allocation would occur in the setting of the fee level. So you would have, your numerator would be the cost of the new system. Your denominator would be the number of new homes or new non-residential square
But once
footage.
we've built the new system,
Okay.
once we've built it, can we still charge for that?
Well, once it's built, you can charge the homes and the demographics contained within the study. So the projections within the study based upon the number of homes and non-residential
So
square
if we
feet.
built it based upon a future projected need,
Mhm.
then we can charge?
Yes.
Okay.
And so let me make sure that I have my information right and report back to you on that, because I think it's an important point, given the magnitude of the size of the
Okay.
fee.
I think it was also 2008,
Can you go over the
2007.
fire facility too as well? I see Menlo Park is an entire district. So what are they talking about?
I would assume that it's probably for ancillary fire, capital improvements,
Just capital improvements to their fire stations?
probably, yeah.
We don't do that.
No, and so what we're proposing is to have this general government fee that could capture those type of things in there.
And this is just for development, it's not for.
Correct.
Just for new development.
New development.
New building permit pulled, they get hit with the fees. So in light of sort of Palo Alto's unique nature, we sort of, in my professional opinion, after looking at the needs list and surveying city departments, providing some minor updates and some small increases to your fee program, I'd like to take this time to point out that we are setting maximum fees here. The city council always retains the authority to charge less. So oftentimes I get the question, well, what if they're already too high? Most cities don't do updates to roll their fees back. That's not very practical. You always have the authority to charge less. I've seen it a lot in the last 5 years. Where development is not clamoring, it's usually not an issue. So you currently have a citywide transportation fee. These are not the zonal fees, but you have a citywide transportation fee. I believe it's around $3,000 per single-family home. I think that could afford to see a slight increase. And then I'm suggesting 2 new fee categories, also small size, but I think that would help defray some of the costs of those capital improvements. Public safety fee for a new public safety building, which I know has been on the agenda for a while. Some new fire stations, some new rescue vans, things such as that, which are old. I spoke with your fire department, police chief. And then a general government category for municipal service center, which I know is a big ticket item. Again, these fees are not going to cover anywhere close to the whole of that the budget, the construction budget for that. It is simply an arrow in the quiver to help you defray some of those costs.
But we already have a community facility fee, so.
Correct. That is.
You're asking us to go on top of that, and was that, Lalo, to capture some of this, fire and police and
No, I
such?
think it was more for the, community center type activity, Lucy Stern.
Lucy Stern?
Yes.
That kind of stuff.
Yeah, there's a list of Cloverly.
Cloverly.
I believe Mitchell was in it. I didn't feel comfortable putting municipal buildings in that category in an attempt to update that. I didn't feel like the nexus was very strong there, considering it was sort of recreational community centers. So I didn't want to conflate the two.
So I'm sorry, we're so out of order, but can I just go ahead and?
Yeah.
So when these fees come in, they go into a cost category, you sequester them.
Yes,
And then we tap into that into our CIP budget.
correct.
Is it differentiated from the rest of the general fund dollars that we allocate to CIP?
Yes, we identify the source of funding that is coming from impact
That's when we
fee.
have the double line.
Yeah, so we may
Okay.
have a park project that.
Right.
Well, the reservoir at El Camino had some portions of those in there.
Yeah, Santa Clara, my goodness.
No, they were saying they don't think that they shared other
Oh,
information.
We asked several times, and some communities don't have as many fees because, fire districts step in. Sometimes to analyze what a city is and a city isn't, you have fire protection districts in some and not in others. It can be difficult. So what we have, I believe is attached, and that document to the CMR, is the draft needs list for the city of Palo Alto. This list is really the universe of improvements in these categories, and we targeted 2035 as our target year. So it is expansive, it is inclusive, it is meant to be.
Did you give us this, or is that part of the
It's
packet?
packet.
I believe
Okay.
it was part of it.
So what page is that?
51 of the packet.
Thank you.
And so this is from working with city departments, city staff. Looked at the cost myself, my engineering team has looked at it. They all do seem reasonable, but I must point out that if there's nothing on this list, there can be no fees. And so it is perspective. It does require that we use the best information that we have now. We have to do our homework, we have to discuss it. Do we have a crystal ball? No. Things do change. Projects can drop on and off. Our development impact fees have to get that snapshot,
So we're better off being as inclusive as possible, you're saying?
At this early stage, that is
Mhm.
what I would recommend. Because once projects start getting struck, we haven't calculated the fees yet. And one thing that I've said to Lalo many times, and I'm sure he's tired of hearing, is the tail can't really wag the dog here. We can't really target a fee level and then work our way back to improvements that make it work. That's
Mhm.
not really the point of AB 1600, and is frowned upon. So we try to be inclusive, and then we sort of will calculate some draft fees, circulate those to you guys, and get your impression.
So you mentioned that we're not going to come anywhere close to obtaining all the fees we need for a new municipal services center or a public safety building, but at the same time we're taking this into account when trying to determine what the fees are. So I guess what are we aiming for? I mean, how do we determine these fees if we've acknowledged it's not going to be to try to raise the whole $265 million, obviously? What is the process for setting these fees?
Well, I think sort of generally, if you think about those bottom line numbers as your numerator and your denominator being the share of new homes and non-residential square feet over the next 20 years, we equalized the non-residential to sort of create an equivalent dwelling unit, so it's all allocated. So that would be the process. I would recommend, and this is where you guys come into play, is developing sort of digestible, palatable fee levels,
Mhm.
which are not so high such that they anger people, because if people are upset with fee increases, I think you've already lost. And so we're looking for controlled, mitigated, moderate fee increases that can get the city more revenue, and that don't really sort of jeopardize your relationship with the development community. No one wants to see fees that are so, there are communities whose fees are so high the developers
Mhm.
go across the city line. You guys are not there yet, and I don't think with these you would be. But if I did the calculations and you were, I would tell
Then
you.
you tailor
I would
back.
tell-
Can I
Mhm.
interject there? I think I would frame it somewhat differently. And that is, I would want to look at setting a fee level that would cause new development to pay for their proportionate or pro rata share of the cost of the additional capital improvements that we've determined we need to sustain ourselves as a community.
Absolutely.
To me, that's the fair framework. And then maybe we have discussions on the margins of that, but I think that's what
You're
should be
absolutely right.
the objective discussion.
And that's what you've done in the past as committees, obviously different committee. In, my recollection of, not everything's in the head, but there were different discussions as to having various percentage of the fee be the fee itself, depending on what it was. And so your predecessors made calls on those types
And
of.
I'll make it as an example.
Yeah.
I recall, because I was one of the people who initially promoted this from the planning commission, when we adopted a park impact fee. And if my recollection is right, we had a discussion around the 2 acres per 1,000 people that is embedded in our comprehensive plan as an objective. And I'm not sure if that was how it all finally got sorted out, but I certainly remember that the discussion was framed around that. And if I recall correctly, I think San Jose has 3 acres per 1,000, or at least at that time had it. So we can have a policy objective of what we think is correct for the community. We would have to justify it. So for instance, on the park discussion, I remember it being referenced that, well, you can't set a fee for new residents that would have twice as much, they'd be paying a fee for twice as much parkland per capita as what we have done historically. That could become problematic. In reality, when we look at how much parkland we have a strong foundation.
Mhm.
And so we're on good footing here, and some of the other cities who actually may not have as much parkland may have a weaker foundation. But that was the sort of discussion that I recall. And then you have things like a transportation or traffic impact fee. That would be another interesting discussion because as we're aware in traffic, you have kind of an exponential impact of additional traffic on the streets. Their congestion impact is disproportionate to the percentage of the totality that they may be. So a 10% increase in car trips may cause a 20 or 30% increase in congestion. So then it becomes a question of are the new developments paying for the 10% of the total or the 30% increase in congestion? And my memory was that the guidance was that we can't charge them the 30% of congestion that the new trips may cause, but I'm interested in that sort of framing.
Absolutely, and that is what, the process that we'll have next, that is when we do the Nexus study, that is the exact kind of assessment engineering that we will be doing.
Okay.
For the transportation, absolutely look at trip ends, look at congestion. For parks, I didn't include that. By the way, I think you guys are at 5 acres per 1,000 now. So you guys, your parkland dedication fee is in great shape. So your parkland dedication fee is technically different than your park impact fee. You charge one or the other.
It's the land that we buy.
Yeah,
As
yeah.
opposed to
A developer above 50 parcels
redoing the maintenance yard up at the.
has to pay the dedication fee or give up the land. Under an individual homeowner would just pay the park impact fee. So yeah, a lot of moving pieces, but absolutely we would do those for capital facilities and general government, and we could do things like obviously person served, the increase in person served, that's a no-brainer. Calls for service for police and fire, that's a great methodology. You look at the existing calls for service, you project out what new development will demand. and then you just, divide one over the other. The math is not hard.
Mm-hmm. So,
And that would take place in the Nexus study, which you guys would get ample opportunity to review and comment on.
And of course, tonight, we're really only going over the capital needs.
yeah,
list.
Yes.
yeah. So I'm going to bring it back to that and ask a quick question if I can on it's packet page 51, the public safety facilities, and as I begin to answer, well, no, I'm not sure if that's right. Why? I noticed that we have a lot of items under fire facilities, but all we have under police facilities is the public safety building. So a question I had is, why don't we have new police vehicles, for instance, when we have so many fire vehicles listed?
Mm-hmm.
Is there a specific reason for that, or?
Let me give it a try. The majority of the police vehicles are embedded in the fleet replacement.
Mm-hmm.
What we found out in the fire vehicles, they're much bigger in the scale of
Sure.
cost, and the dollars that were estimated at the time that they were enrolled in the fleet replacement is not aligned to the cost.
Got it. So the cost to replace the police vehicles is kind of accounted for, and not so much for fire.
And may I?
Sure.
I had assumed, and this is based on recollection, that we retain fire trucks far longer than we retain police vehicles.
Yeah, the fire engines are typically 15 years. The police vehicles are 3 off the top of my head.
Yeah, and if it's under that 5-year, it doesn't qualify under this capital definition.
I didn't realize it was only 3 years.
Vice Mayor Shepherd?
All right, let's go to parking garages.
I'm
Now-
sorry, parking,
Parking
oh,
garages.
garages.
Since we know that we basically need to do every single parking garage downtown right now, this is not reflecting that.
We need to do what?
What do you mean?
All of our surface parking lots need to be non-surface. They need to be raised
Yeah.
in order to maybe capture, the overflow that we have out in the neighborhoods. We know that.
You may.
Well, this is what, it's
You may.
still anecdotal, I understand, but on the other hand, there's,
Yes.
I want to find out where you decided to stop.
And that's
Because
a
this
good-
is not going to do but one garage, and so I just want
I think
to,
it's 2, actually, but
You're done.
you have the
I was
same
going for the
question
urban lane one, that's what this would do, but.
You have the same question that we debated internally. Unfortunately, Jaime couldn't be here tonight. He had another public meeting that he needed to attend to. So part of the answer was that we don't have the study done to,
To make anything change
to-
right here, right now.
whether 6 or 5 and so we had to go with the best number we could at the moment. And this is the part of the process here, that you use the best information you have. You can't really make up information or say, well, I wish. You gotta have a reasonable knowledge of the cost of the particular item. And so since we've been talking about 2 garages, that's why we left it with the 2 garages.
Well, when
But
you-
it's not, doesn't necessarily mean that that's the right answer going
Right.
forward. We may have a window of opportunity here within the next few weeks, I don't know. It's a question that we need to continue working with Jaime. How long will it take for us to get that assessment done?
When you say that we can't have a wish list, but we sort of do have a wish list with the public safety building. So we
Well,
collect the fee, but if we don't collect the 57 million, then we don't build it, but we still collect the fee. So how does,
Let me use a different word. Wish list is probably not a good word. We can't put something in here that we know we're not going to construct or do. That's what I meant.
Okay.
We know we need a public safety building. It could be funded in some other manner, and we recognize that, and we would adjust as such. But we definitely know there's a need, and we have a reasonable cost estimate.
and then for this building, Civic Center, 16 million, would that seismically retrofit? That's just the plaza deck. This building has not been seismically retrofitted. Is this in here?
Let me, Brad, would you mind helping me answer the question?
Municipal, okay.
Is this on?
Yeah.
Brad Eggleston, Assistant Director of Public Works. Is the question about what the $16 million cost is for the Civic Center? If that's
Well,
the
that-
question, that
yeah.
is for the plaza deck.
Right, but what about the 8 floors of non-seismically retrofitted building? Are we just,
We don't have any project on the horizon that I'm aware of that we're planning for to do seismic retrofit.
So my understanding, and we might have to get back to you, is that we did that work, that's what happens when you are here for so long, the retrofitting through the elevator shafts.
so we've done it?
We did it in the early 90s, where I remember this because we had
So we're safe here?
well, that's why I'm saying I need to get back to you that it was done in the 1990 levels. I don't know if
Okay.
there've been new requirements since then, so that's why I'm kind of hesitant with my response, because it was done to the levels of that, at that period of time.
And can I add that when we've had the discussion, about the police building, and whether the existing police building could be retrofitted, there's a higher seismic level for essential services than there is for general services.
Yeah, and that work took care of the tower, as I recall, not necessarily the wing.
And the city hall?
That's why I was saying I don't think it took care of that wing, but
Okay.
I'm kind of out of my league a little bit here,
So
but
there are one to two different possible thresholds. One is whether the level of upgrade done in the 1990s is still the correct level today for the general services. And then there's this other threshold where if something was an essential service, it has to be able to have the highest seismic standard anyway. Not a normal seismic.
But we're not going to capture this here.
well, we'll double check. We'll go back and check our records.
So, but, no, I just wanted to frame it right. I think it's a valid question about whether we should be including this as a long-term capital need. I mean, I'm interested in that as well.
Yeah, because it would be a reasonable project, unless you tell me otherwise, Nate. It seems to me that it would be a reasonable project to include if there was an additional retrofit needed to meet current standards.
A new development, new residents would obviously benefit from it, so.
Councilmember Schmidt.
He's been
Well,
quiet.
Let me go back a step. On the top of page 2, you describe, you quote from the Act of what can be included in impact fees, and it says public improvements, public services, and community amenities. Now, you've stated up and down that you can only use capital investments, but this seems very clearly to extend beyond capital investments.
There are a category of public services under water and sewer that would qualify, but for our purposes, no public services. So, yeah, that's just a direct quote, but for our purposes, no public services.
I mean, you haven't quoted anything that says services are excluded. You have quoted something that says the issue is broader than capital investment.
Okay,
With that,
fair enough, but
computers are listed in there, and I guess that falls into your question. Because we have $750,000 worth of computers, that
Yeah.
would be something that we sort of.
This says public services, and the way we define services are
yeah,
human.
it's just a quote, but yeah, it is restricted to just capital improvement stuff, so.
So you just quoted the wrong part.
Yeah.
Okay. On the list, why isn't grade crossings listed? We had a vote last night, we were spending money on a detailed study. The nexus, what we're talking about is commercial people moving into town, bringing workers, more traffic. Our streets are already closed down, especially the east-west streets. And grade crossings become a essential response to a growing Palo Alto.
Well, I don't think that's, let me attempt to answer that as a policymaker, because I think it's more in our category. And as someone who advocated that we do that additional study, the council has made no policy decision. It's not within any of our capital, long-term capital plan at this time. So after
I guess they use the term that this list is inclusive to 2035. Now, 2035 is a long time away.
But inclusive of what has been identified as a prospective project. We haven't done that yet.
Yeah.
All
Right.
we've done, let me just try to answer you.
Okay, I see your point, but in 2.5 months, when we get the study and have a discussion, it may well be that would get included, and that's before the spring of 2014, when we're going to do the Nexus study.
So that's what I was going to attempt to say to you, is that we may, in the coming months or year, move this grade separation issue from a possibility that we're evaluating and just getting preliminary information on to something that, even if we don't have a specific capital plan, it is at a policy level an intention. And I would assume that at that point in time it would move from the excluded bucket to the included bucket. Is that correct? Okay.
Yeah, and my point is, since we're talking about development fees, it's that development that's going to enhance the need for the program. So just to have that on our thoughts.
I agree. Yeah, I mean, there's obviously some, just trying to close the book or close the loop at some point.
Now, timeline. Lalo, you were going to go through the timeline.
Yeah, I
You
was,
do that, and I have a question on it.
okay.
Before we move off the list, can I just ask why we have computers there?
IT upgrades were identified. I think obviously your sort of standard laptops.
But as number
maybe
two
not.
is acquisition of new computers, it's not IT upgrades. So should you change the term there? to IT
Let us
upgrades?
work on
Yeah.
that.
That seems like a non-bricks and mortar thing, that's all.
Mhm.
But IT is bricks and mortar.
No, it's there.
You asked about the timeline, so in the slides that I read from, with the city logo, at the last page, slide 7 has the proposed timeline for you. So what we would list it in here, not knowing which direction you wanted to go. As I mentioned, we don't have to go to the council if you don't want to, but if you wanted to do that step, we're looking, the December calendar's looking pretty heavy, so maybe January would be probably more likely. DTA and us would present the Nexus study to either the council if you wanted to expedite the process, or come back to you, and then we would have to build in a faster track time. And then the final study is approved by council in April, and then we discuss with you, the finance committee of next year, how we would incorporate it into the proposed 2015 budget process during the budget hearings in May. And then in June with the council, and then it would be implemented in July.
Okay, if I could just hit off that back on page 50, attachment A. I'm concerned that the timeline is moving pretty quickly, that our time and effort is focusing on this list, capital list, and not on the elements of the nexus that are apparent in attachment A. It seems to me there's a number of critical questions that need discussion. We have talked now for a year and a half, that our assessment of 4 workers per 1,000 square feet might be a misstatement. Now, that's a critical part of our nexus study here, and under this project we're working on, and any other project going on in the city, we're not gonna get that number before this study comes due. Seems to me that's a critical study that people have been talking about. It has a tremendous impact on parking structures, how many parking structures we need, on roadways, on transportation. And all of these things here assume.
So which study are you referring to?
Well,
Which fee?
implied in the transportation fee
Oh,
and
I see
the
what you're saying, okay. One element of the.
traffic impact fee are certain assumptions about development.
Mhm.
Wait a minute, but what study are you referring to is what I asked?
As to how we're
Uh,
gonna change the 1,000.
Well, let me quote the Director of Planning from January
You can ju- okay, but
2013.
just-
Said, we need to redo our traffic and parking study. Says the numbers we have now are outdated.
Okay, so I think there is an issue here. I'm not quite clear that what you're referring to as the Director of Planning statement was a specific study in a specific time frame. But I agree that there's an issue, and my notes actually were around that we have historically framed these impact fees around, in particular in the commercial areas, as dollars per square foot. And the issue we've been struggling with as a council is that we aren't sure that that's any longer the correct metric. And should it be dollars per employee? Now, we haven't figured out how to sort through this. If we had we're having preliminary discussion around a business license tax, and whether if we had one, and if it went to TDM measures or infrastructure, whatever, should it be linked to number of employees? Because if we have zoning for 4 office workers per 1,000 square feet, and one business might only have 3 and another might have 8, they're both paying the same amount per square foot and having radically different impacts. But
Let me give another example from the table here. We have $4,500 from a commercial per 1,000 square feet. We have $10,000 for residents. Now, the number of people who are involved might be the same, might even be much higher on the commercial side than the residential side. But we are using assumptions about how many people are in those square feet. And scattered through this table are 4 or 5 assumptions about things that have tremendous impacts on our nexus. Now, where in this timeline are we going to have an opportunity to not just bring up the issue, but actually have some data?
Okay. I've been, this has been a couple year process. We've requested updated demographics from the planning department 3 times now. The demographics would be front and center in the Nexus study. And because, for instance, if we're allocating, we're developing a methodology and we say person served. Obviously, the employee counts that you're referencing are going to go into the future person served count. So, you know, that 4 per 1,000 is obviously something we would address at that time. We do have competing demographic data sources, and we have had them vetted. It's the same, just skip it wasn't Cash, was it? It was, it may have been Cash.
Cash was in planning.
Yeah,
Well,
I think I was working with Cash, and we looked at ABAG data, we looked at California Department of Finance data, and then there were some adjustments made potentially to reflect the concern that you're bringing up right now, but that would be front and center in the Nexus study. And it's something we could bring forward, if you like, a review of the demographics as well.
Yeah, I think, you know, rather than go and ask someone, what number are you using, they would use the traditional number. and I think we are interested in
Mm-hmm.
what it actual number is. Is there a methodology to vet that number?
Let me ask a clarifying question of Nate. So right now, we were recommending that we update the citywide transportation fee, but what I'm hearing you say is the specific concern that Councilmember Schmidt outlined would be part of the Nexus study review.
Yes.
Anyway, even though we are not proposing to update the, for example, looking at the park.
No, not for parks. For instance, what he's saying is if you took the existing transportation fee study and you input new demographics, you would end up with a different fee, even if you didn't change the improvements. And so he's asking us to review both the improvements and the demographics.
Right.
And we would do that for these as
Yeah.
well.
Okay.
So that will not come back to the Finance Committee, but probably be part of the March 2014.
Let me clarify something on the timeline. The timeline is, has flexibility. It's up to the committee in terms of how fast we want to move. Obviously, as projects come in the pipeline, the intent was to update this as soon as possible to be able to start collecting from those projects that are having the incremental impact. But short of that, you can give us direction on a different timeline.
Yeah, I'm just concerned that the way you have this, it comes into the budget process.
Right.
So the middle or inundated with
Yes,
300 pages of budget figures.
Well,
This was
let me try and
for-
move this forward. I concur that there is an issue there, and what I don't see is the Nexus study coming to the Finance Committee prior to going to the Council. And so would we have an opportunity to schedule it to the Finance Committee in
Yes.
February or whatever before going to the Council?
Or in March, we come to you first. And that's what was my remarks when I was going through the schedule. I said, if you wanted to expedite it, this is a recommendation, but we can definitely go through Finance Committee first.
Well, so I want to have that additional step without delaying it. So when you say if I want to expedite it, yes, I want to expedite. I want to make sure it gets in this year's budget. But I do think the Nexus study should be vetted by the Finance Committee. So can we have both things? There.
Okay. By the way, Nate and I are not related, in case you're wondering.
Yes,
So Nate's answer is yes, he can do that, so then I just have to make sure that I can, with everything that is aligned there, because obviously, as you mentioned, we have to do the budget as well. So let us shoot for that, and if we have a different timeline, then we would definitely let you know that in the January update.
And if I could step back, I fully recognize that giving people a needs list before a Nexus study seems bizarre. We like to show people the needs list, and it's not something every firm does because that transparency is important. We don't want to show up with an Nexus study and you guys.
I don't think it's
What are
bizarre.
any of these things? And so,
I thought
okay, good.
I mean, there, as we acknowledged earlier, there's a bit of an iterative process here,
absolutely.
but I think it's informative. I'll also add as a comment in this issue that Councilmember Schmidt was raising about looking at the fee structure toward new residences versus new commercial space and corresponding employees. Within these different categories, I can't recall whether we had proportioned certain of these fees that, for instance, transportation is and public safety may be ones where we really want to pretty fully apportion it to any new employees. I'm not sure that new employees who don't reside here will use our parks and community centers and libraries as much as our residents do. So I'm not sure where the correct balance is, but if we have all of these structures, and I don't recall whether this is the case, but if they all have roughly the same ratio between residential fees and commercial fees, I'm not sure that that applies for each category equally.
Correct, and it doesn't always, and that it's just one of the facts. I sense that for instance, just take your parks. That was probably they weighted one employee is half of a resident.
Mhm.
And just, you know, roughly, and that's sort of where they got to.
Okay.
And that's pretty typical.
Right, great.
So are we going to go ahead and approve this?
Capital needs list?
That is.
Or are we, that's what,
That's what we're requesting.
yeah. And then also, I guess we just need to decide whether we want it to go to full council. I sort of feel like it should go to full council, maybe on consent or something, just so that they can see the list, and if they have something, you know, they, you know, can become active with it.
We can add a,
It still will be tentative even when it goes to them, right? Or is that etched in stone?
well, once they complete with that, then Nate will take that as his master list, if you
So we
will.
don't get to add anything after that, or until you bring it back in the March again?
You can.
Yeah.
You know, it just
That-
creates new versions.
We may not make the July, let's
And it
be
just-
upfront, you may not make the July version, date if we keep changing that, because then he has to go back and update the.
Every number
all the
will change,
numbers.
unfortunately.
And so you could, it's just keep in mind the
So, I
timing.
mean, the staff recommendation is that we recommend approval by the full council, so it would go to the council according to.
Yeah.
That's our recommendation, but
That's
you don't
what's on
have.
the timeline
You don't
also.
have to follow a recommendation, I guess
Right.
is our.
No, I
our point.
understand, but I'm just saying that.
Yeah, okay.
Vice Mayor Shepherd was speaking as if it wasn't going to go to the council unless we took some deliberate action. And if we followed the staff recommendation, it would, and Lalo had clarified that it would more likely be in January than December.
Most likely, given the agenda that we looked at today.
Did you want this to be action on council,
Well,
or just?
that's your call. I mean, I think if it's a consent item, they can definitely send us their comments or pull it on the item. So that could work. I mean, it's your pleasure.
Well, I think that's worth us considering and putting ourselves in the place of our colleagues. Do we think that the full council is going to want to wade in to this, or whether it would go with, normal action would be that if it's unanimous recommendation from the committee, it goes to consent. But the mayor and city manager have the opportunity to discuss whether it's something that would be of significant interest for the full council. But we can also make that recommendation here and now if we think that the full council is likely to want to wade into it as much as we would like to expedite this. We may want to consider that. Councilmember Schmidt?
Yeah, I think this is way too important to go on consent. It's an important decision ultimately by the city, and to prepare the council for the ultimate nexus study. I think it's important that they be introduced to this, even if it's a short item.
I don't know if we have that, but. Are you making that as a motion then?
Yes.
Okay, all right. I'll go ahead and second it. I agree. I think that you're adding 3 new fees.
Okay,
I guess I'll
sec-
speak to that.
just a sec, but he
Yeah.
gets it. Would you like to speak to your motion further?
No.
Go right ahead.
See, we were working it. You're asking us to do these 3 new fees. I think you might want to feature that a little more crisply. It's here, but maybe just initiate with that,
Okay.
so that people get that this is sort of the add-on, that we're not reinventing the entire wheel, but we are massaging it deeply, but also adding on, so.
I thought we were avoiding the massage parlors.
Yeah, that's true.
Okay. I had 2 other questions / comments. One is whether there was a reference that we have not charged fees for major remodels. And the definition of a major remodel got improved a little bit a few years ago. It used to be, if you left the chimney up, it would count as a remodel. And so the difference is still, we can have homes that are fundamentally rebuilt, that are, change the square footage drastically, put $1 million or more into the construction, and they're not captured in any way here. So that's a question I would have is, and would like to see that brought forward for what is a valid distinction line? Is it only if you scrape, or should there be some other threshold? And I'm not saying I have an answer. I just think it's something we should discuss. And then
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
The way I understand an impact fee is when we have a whole new family inventing a new place to live in Palo Alto.
Well, that's your understanding, but that's not necessarily a definition.
But it's a new, so therefore, a new population that needs to have, that is going to walk through all of our services all over.
And that's
Yeah,
perfectly
so-
valid when we have the discussion.
Okay.
The other thing is that just when we were comparing to other cities, it struck me that we're looking at absolute dollar numbers here, but there's nothing that is these dollars as a percentage of the value of the constructed property. And that's where our fees are even more in line, or even perhaps even below the mean under that metric. And I don't know if there's if that's a valid way to look at it, and if so, whether that should, when we bring this back and there's a context of are our new fees at an appropriate level, that would be one metric that I'd be interested in understanding.
Assessed value or appraised value.
Great. Probably appraised, yeah. That's what- any other discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
That passes unanimously.
Thank you. I wanted to thank Nate and then also Nancy Nagel and a bunch of department representatives that are behind me. Thank you for coming tonight.
Thank you. Thank you.
I'll be back in a second.
I just realized I didn't carry around. Man. It's been in my backpack, I mean, my knapsack for months. I didn't realize I had taken it.
$25 a month to have access to this.
What is that?
This has been activated? I caught you.
Yes, but don't worry, I was reading that. I had no need, if I needed it, I would have been counting on it. The famous.
Got some good stories.
Well, yeah, but John Muir didn't need a daggone salary.
Greg was asking if we needed a motion to have it come back to Finance Committee, and
No,
I think that's just direction. We just gave direction. Okay. All right. We'll give one moment for Councilmember Burnham.
You know your precinct number?
275. It's odd.
Yeah, it's 55 against and 45 for, but there's only 4 precincts, 2075. So
All right, we're now going on to our final item, which is the audit of contract oversight, trenching, and the installation of electric substructure. Welcome.
Thank you. Human Busin, Acting City Auditor. I have a short presentation. To begin, I'd like to acknowledge and thank the staff of the Utilities Department, the Administrative Services Department, and also KCN Construction for their time, information during this audit. Also, I'd like to acknowledge former City Auditor Jim Pelletier for his role during the audit. We completed this audit and issued a draft report under Jim's supervision. I'd also like to introduce Lisa Wahara on my left here, who was assigned to this audit as well. She was a senior auditor for the city for previously for 4 years, returned part-time in 2004 to help with sales and use tax recoveries, provides quality control and audit reports. Lisa is a certified internal auditor and also a certified public accountant. Next slide, please. What did we review in this audit? We reviewed the Utilities Department $1.9 million contract with Casey Construction to determine if the department effectively managed its contract in accordance with contract terms, the municipal code, and relevant policies and procedures. We regard contracting as an important area that may be a high-risk area if adequate controls are not in place for all phases of the procurement process, including the solicitation, evaluation, award, and contract administration phase. This contract was for trenching services and the installation of electric substructure, including customer service installations and other supporting work. Next slide. Finding 1, we discuss the flawed bid. We conclude the city did not appropriately award the contract to Casey Construction. The Utilities Department and ASD did not effectively address a significant variance between the city's estimate and the selected contractor's flawed bid, which may have resulted in additional costs of approximately $281,000. This estimate assumes that another contractor would have sufficiently monitored by the city, would have performed a similar amount of work during a given period of time. In our opinion, while the city awarded the contract to the lowest bidder, it did not award the contract to the lowest responsible and responsive bidder as defined by the municipal code. A responsive bidder has a bid that conforms in all material respects to the requirements of the bid documents. A responsible bidder has the ability, capacity, experience, and skill to perform the work, provide the goods and services in accordance with bid specifications. We feel staff did not accurately communicate to City Council why Casey Construction's bid was significantly lower than other bids that were submitted and the city's estimates. Staff attributed the difference between its estimate of contract costs and Casey's bid to a lack of demand for construction projects. After the opening of the bids, Casey realized that it had made a mistake in the bid. In one instance, it had thought that it was replacing a parking lot. Casey indicated initially that it wanted to retract its bid and it was willing to lose a $71,000 bid bond rather than $2 million of loss over the next 3 years. According to Casey, city staff gave Casey assurance to proceed with the contract by indicating that Casey could use optional time and materials line items. Casey billed the city primarily using those optional bid line items, which were mostly time and materials. The primary bid line items were lump sum or unit price items and were intended to be the main method of pricing all work under the contract. This next slide you see here has an exhibit that shows Casey's bid, the bars on the left, the bar on the left, I should say, and you can see how it compares with the other bids that were submitted. The city's estimate that was initially reported in the invitation for bid document, and then the revised, or the estimate, I should say, that was actually reported to council in the staff report, which was significantly lower. Finding 2, the contract was not appropriately reevaluated or renewed. In 2009, the Utilities Department and Administrative Services Department entered into a one-year contract for $652,000. The city paid Casey about $1.9 million during the 3-year period from August 2009 through August 2012, which included about $1.7 million without a valid contract. The city did not formally execute a new contract document for each extension year as required by the contract, and there is no evidence staff formally assessed Casey's performance or contract compliance. Finding 3, contract billing terms were not enforced. This finding has to do with contract administration. The Utilities Department did not enforce contract billing terms that were the basis for awarding the contract to Casey Construction. We found significant variances between contract estimates and the actual costs. Only 19%, or $365,000, of the $1.9 million in total charges under the contract was based on the contract's primary bid line items, which were intended to be the main method for pricing all work and were designed using the conservative lump sum or unit price strategy that is financially protective of the city. 74% of contract billings was based on the contract's optional bid line items, mostly time and materials line items. Staff authorized payment of invoices, even though these line items were not intended to be the main method of pricing work. 7% of contract charges was paid for items not identified by any line item in the contract. Finding 4, the contract was not appropriately managed. We found the Utilities Department did not appropriately manage its contract with Casey to ensure the city's projects were completed in accordance with plans and cost estimates. We summarized the lack of controls in 3 areas. There was no documentation showing quotes were reasonable, consistent with contract terms, and appropriately approved. We found Utilities Department staff reviewed invoices. However, the review process did not ensure compliance with contract terms, and Utilities Department did not maintain documentation showing that the billings were consistent with the quotes. Utilities Department did not maintain documentation showing projects were appropriately inspected and closed out, evidencing approval and completion of the planned work. This audit has 6 recommendations. The recommendations are addressed to the Utilities Department and/or the Administrative Services Department. Most of the recommendations call for implementation of policies and procedures to correct the deficiencies we have noted. Attachment 2 of the report, beginning on page 23, which is packet page 28, shows the recommendations along with the city manager's action plan and target dates. Attachment 3 of the report presents the city manager's response to the audit report. That's packet page 36. Attachment 4 presents the Office of the City Auditor's comments on the response from the city manager. These are areas where we felt additional clarification was needed. That is packet page 44. That ends the short presentation, and we'd like to open up to questions.
Colleagues, who would like to begin?
And let me ask you to say something, just reminding the council of the process.
So there is also a staff response to the auditor's report. So I think probably to make this as sensible as possible is to try to ask as many questions to the auditor as you can without having to pull the staff in, because I think then we may want to have some response back from the staff, and then you want to follow up on the staff thing. So I'll leave it to the council the committee as to how you want to handle it. And if you're also comfortable with just sort of going back and forth between the auditor's comments and the staff response, we can do that also. I just did want to point out that we have a staff response also, so I don't know if you want to hear from the staff response first or ask questions.
Hearing the staff response and then going into questions of both the auditor and the staff as appropriate.
That's probably most effective.
Great,
Mm-hmm.
okay.
Why don't I start first and then let Val follow my comments. First of all, We appreciate the work that the auditor's office has done, and Human and Lisa, and I think we don't have a problem with the recommendations. Well, some of the processes we have, they weren't formalized, and I think formalizing this into policies, in procedures, and obviously the training is definitely agreeable. In accepting proposals, there's a lot of complexities. We're a very complex city. We have many different types of business units, and therefore different needs, much different than surrounding cities. And it could match a big city because we have an airport, fiber to the premises, and so you kind of get the picture that we're going to have to deal with things that are different and maybe uncommon. One of the things that happens is there's cyclical periods of time in how vendors price themselves into a project. Having a large difference between one bidder and then the second next bidder is not uncommon. I shouldn't say uncommon. It's not surprising at times. It's a better statement. During this period of time that this contract was awarded, we started seeing the downturn in the economy, and we started seeing, and you may recall, we were reporting through Public Works and probably through utilities too, that we were seeing bids come in at 20 to 30% lower than our estimates. Not too far from that period of time, to give you an illustration of another one, we went out for bids for a landscaping maintenance. You may recall we contracted out landscaping. We used to do it in-house. We went and did it by contract. And the difference between the lowest bidder and the second highest for this park maintenance contract was $1.58 million, just to give you an order of magnitude. That contract didn't have any issues like Casey did up front in the bidding process, so it's different in that regard. The issues arose after the fact. Towards the end of the first year, the company that received the award came to us and said, we're losing money. The gap in the first year was about $350,000, and the firm said, we would like for you to consider increasing our compensation by $250,000 to make us whole. Otherwise, I don't know if we can stay in business. So that was through the department. The department contacted my purchasing folks. They got me involved. I got the attorney's office involved and the city manager, and we all looked at it and decided we have to have them honor the agreement, because we can't set a precedent that people are just going to start lining up and saying, you need to increase our compensation because we didn't give you the proper bid for us to be whole. The gentleman had an option. He could walk away, and then we would go against the performance bond. Once he realized the consequences of doing that, he decided to honor the contract for the full 3 years. And so we got our services completed. We paid him the compensation that we agreed upon. In July, you just recently awarded the new 3-year agreement, and the prices are now matching up closer to what he was seeking for in this latest agreement. Why I'm saying that is because the order of magnitude of differences is not an issue from my perspective in the award. The concern that are raised that there was an admission of error is a concern, and obviously needs to be discussed and resolved. In my opinion, that's what we try to do. Unfortunately, what we didn't do well is we didn't document this well. When the meeting was held, there were discussions about exactly what Human's stating, concerns about maybe being short millions of dollars in the way that they structured. And then maybe they would take the a hit on the bond bid. And from my staff's discussions with me on this issue after the fact was that at the end of the day, it was resolved that they would honor the bid. We don't have anything by KC. Yeah, we don't have anything that states who was in these meetings, so Human's correct, that there were no clear records of that. What we have is a memo from the company saying we will honor the bid for the first year and want to revisit after the first year on the experience of the contract. And so my staff felt that given that we had a commitment from them and that we're going to revisit that it met the criteria for the Muni Code. Since I gave you that response in writing, or gave him on that response in writing, additional information has come to me about the timing of when the time and material usage begun during this period. That is that I believe I need to do a further review of that to see when that actually occurred, and it's going to take me a little time to do that and see if there was any issues there. What we should have done, besides the formal documentation of the follow-up, is to follow it up with the utilities department, because the process how it works is once we do the award, we turn that over to the department, whatever department it is in the city, and then they manage that. They take that on, the responsibility going forward. They make the decisions on any changes, change orders, contingency use, renewals. And given that we knew that there was a concern in the discussions and even leading up to the award, we could have followed up and said, hey, how are things going? Are they meeting the terms? Do we have any issues? Can we help you with anything? We didn't do that. So that's part of the training, part of what we need to enhance in that piece and have a better process. So we totally agree with the recommendation on that. In terms of the management of the contract, I think this is where, I want to turn it over to Val and have her speak to that.
It's okay. Chair Burr, members of the committee, Val Fong, Utilities Director. I'm just going to make a few brief comments. From a utilities perspective, we certainly take the findings from the city auditor's audit very seriously. We understand how important it is to do good and proper contract management. I'd like to point out that I've got here with me tonight to also respond to any questions you might have our operations assistant director, our electric engineering manager, electric engineering manager, Dean Batchelor, operations assistant director, and our budget person, who's Dave Yen. So we can answer any questions you might have. This was a bit of an unusual contract. It is dependent on services, and actual work performed is not defined in advance. Some of it's what customers might request. So you don't really know. It's not like a defined project in advance like many of our other contracts. We did take a look at a lot of our other existing contracts. We have not found the same procedural gaps that the city auditor found with this one. We are establishing and have already established some new processes for checks and balances to manage requests for work that come in from customers, the contractor estimates, the contractor performance, and invoicing, and we've centralized the retention of those documents. We are moving forward to augment the staff in this area, contract administration area. We had approval in the most recent fiscal year budget. We have posted that position, we have conducted interviews, and now it's just pending giving an offer and doing background checks, and that person being available to come, we hope, within the month. I've personally met with the operations and engineering staff in their early morning tailboards. I've impressed upon them the importance not only of safe, reliable utility services, but also of this contract management. We've begun training for our employees, and we know it's just the beginning, but we've held a training course on RFPs, and we've held a training course on project management. So these are just, the first steps. We know we have a lot more to do, but we're headed down that path of making the corrections.
May I make an overarching comment? I may come back. Pardon me. Sorry. Yeah. Wow. So I may come back to some of these things. I took a more active hand in this particular response than I typically do on audit responses, and actually we got a little bit delayed in coming back to the council because I told the staff I wanted more of a response and an acknowledgement of deficiencies in managing this particular contract, and hopefully that's being expressed here. There is the issue of the contract award, and then there's an issue of the contract management that come up in this report. And we also need to acknowledge that there's often a real-life tension between those two environments all the time, between I got to get some stuff to get my job done, and then I got to get the job done over here. I think the ASD director here has acknowledged that there are some additional things that he wants to look at, and I would remind the committee, of course, that in the process of this actually was a fairly formalistic process that we use with the auditor making findings, doing response, and then we have an ongoing way of reporting back to the council ultimately on the progress on the response to those audits. Some of that will be ongoing. I don't think I'm stepping out on a limb here, but in this particular contract, I think this is much more of an issue of contract management than it is on the contract award. I think the auditor's office has pointed out that I think from their point of view, they're saying, well, I would have recommended that the purchasing department, the contract officers had exercised more maybe leadership isn't the right word, but control over the award, saying, look at this gap. You should have pursued and drilled this down even more and potentially rejected it. And I'm not making excuses for that, but we also live in a real world where, again, there's a constant tension between people who want to, who need to get work done and those who want to supply it. And the extreme example is if you take the old war movies where the people are on the front need stuff and the quartermasters are back in the back, and they're saying, look, we got some stuff we've got to get done, give us our gear, and they're saying, oh, well, I'm sorry, you got to fill out these forms, et cetera, et cetera. So there's a constant tension in every organization. That doesn't make any excuses, but is part of the real life dynamic that's there. The second issue is I've actually asked our own staff to be doing some ongoing look at other contracts themselves post this period. But those of us who were here do, and I'm not making any excuses for it, do need to remember that it was a unique environment in 2009 and 2010 where in some ways we're trying to figure out, boy, are we in a depression? We had outside of this, many different kinds of contracts or issues we had where people would even say, I am going to lose money on responding to this, but not this particular contract. But I need to keep my staff employed. and working. And so I'm willing to make bids and whatever that don't work. Now, I can't say that that was fully the case in it here, but we do need to realize that we were in something of an anomaly during that period of time. I can't say that that's what affected this, but I know personally, if we went back, we could look at many, and sometimes we were going, aha, I can't believe our good fortune as a city. We're getting these ridiculously low bids because, as indicated, the competition was either so fierce or people would actually say, we're willing to lose money in order to keep our company afloat, hoping for better times. Now, I only offer that, and again, this isn't based on any fact, but understanding the possibility, because and I'm not being critical at all, but the auditor's office has also indulged in some possibilities of alternatives without those being entirely based in actual fact. Did we lose potentially $281,000 by not doing it right? That's not actually a fact, but that is a possibility, and it's a possibility that's difficult to refute because we didn't follow an appropriate, transparent, and accountable process. And to me, that's what everything I'm seeing right now, this really boils down to the failure, particularly on the contract management side, to manage and document it's ultimately not really acceptable in the public realm, because when questions come up, one's not in a position to be able to really answer the questions. Could we have gotten more value or not? On the alternative, we can't look at this and say, well, if this had actually been handled differently, could we have done all the work that we did at a lower price? We can't answer that question either. Now, that's not to let anybody or anything off the hook, because clearly we have a substantial process failure here, and there are lots of reasons for that, and we're very committed to how we respond, both in the audit, but beyond that. I wanted to let the committee know that prior to this audit coming out, but I had conversations with the prior with Jim Pelletier, the city auditor, about this, that, in September, early September, I'd established a staff task force focused on contract management, review, and process redesign that has a number of folks involved who've been looking at a range of issues designed to also, even outside of this audit, be able to recommend process improvements that we have in our organization to ensure that we have appropriate accountability and the ability to report accurately, let alone forget the fact that this contract was awarded on one basis and it was implemented on another one, and that's inexcusable. So I think I'll leave it at there right now as just sort of some overarching comments as to how I see this. Thanks.
Okay. Colleagues, any first go round of questions, or Councilmember Berman?
Do you want to go?
No, you can go. I'll go. You want me to go?
Sure.
So I think I try to kind of break down my comments and questions into the different, aspects of the audit and the process. And the first starts with the approval of the contract, and it's mentioned in the audit.
Oh, the other way.
Oh, you think the other way too? Never had a library voice. We need to set some sort of a policy that anytime the lowest bid is a certain percent below the second lowest bid, serious red flags grow up, and a increased level of scrutiny occurs in evaluating that lowest bid. And I know that it's mentioned in the staff response. It says significant differences. We need to figure out a percentage difference that automatically, I understand, maybe it is the case that sometimes it's totally legitimate and sometimes it's totally not. But I see this. I think back to Mitchell Park Library, which I think it might be fairly similar in certain aspects. It very well may be that it ends up being a perfectly responsible bid, but we need to spend a lot more time analyzing those bids to make sure that's the case. Because just a couple that, all it takes is a few that aren't to really create a negative situation for the city and create a lot of questions on those that might have been responsive and responsible. So I don't know if that's a staff decision on what the percentage is, if that's a council policy on what the percentage is, but I'd like to see us actually make it really simple for you guys by identifying a percentage, and if it's a percentage below, boom, extra steps have to happen to review those bids. I kind of thought of some universal rules as I was reading through this. One is if the bidder doesn't have the expertise to understand the invitation for bid and submit an accurate bid, they don't have the expertise to perform the actual work. And if they can't be responsive, they're not responsible, kind of thing. And obviously you don't want to be too universal in these things, but it seems like this bidder had serious problems with understanding the project up front. That should be additional red flags on their bid. And then rule number 2 is nothing good happens when the city has to talk a contractor into following through on a bid that they're interested in rescinding, because we don't know what was said. The audit says that we heard something from the contractor where they remember the staff saying, "Oh well, we'll just switch it to time and materials early, and that's how you can recoup." We don't have proper documentation to prove or refute that, but. You've got. I would be worried about a contractor who all of a sudden gets cold feet once they really understand what they've gotten themselves into, and talking somebody in. It's like talking a girl into dating you. You can talk her into a date or two, but that's probably not going to work long term. That wasn't written down. That was probably off the top of my head, and I should have kept that one there. There's the issue of the information that was provided to council, and I should probably let my colleagues tackle that one because I wasn't on council then. But we rely on the information that you guys provide. That's all we have to make decisions, and it's really important for us to be given full disclosure on all of that information.
The thought occurs to me, this is going to be an involved conversation.
Do you want me to stop there?
Well, no, that was only part of the thoughts. But the other part is that we should still be in a question period.
Okay.
Because what we want to do is probe deeper and then offer comments and recommendations, because we still have I certainly have some questions that could influence my comments.
Sure.
And it may be the same for you.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So let me try to kind of tease out which ones are questions and which are comments. I probably should have done that ahead of time. Okay, so one question is, in staff's response in regards to renewal of the contract, it says at the time of renewal of the contract.
Page, I'm sorry.
I don't, in fact.
All right, that's okay.
But I'll give you the quote, which it says, at the time of renewal, the contractor's performance was reviewed to determine if the contract would be extended, end quote. And it also says the contractor was performing satisfactorily per the review. The audit says there's no evidence staff formally assessed Casey's performance or contract compliance. So I guess kind of which is it? Was there a review? Was there not a review? And if there was a review, is there evidence of a review, or was this an oral review, talked amongst the utilities department?
So I'll ask electric engineering manager, and you might have to use that microphone, might just be easier. Tom Ting to respond to that. I'll just make one remark. We did request a lot of work of this contractor. The contractor delivered. The work was done, and the work was done well. But beyond that, Tom, if you could respond to the review, the annual review of the contractor's performance.
Good evening. Tom Ting, Electric Engineering Manager. In this case, it was most likely done on a verbal discussion of whether we should renew the contract with his customer.
And thank you. And moving forward, I don't know if this was explicitly stated in the kind of staff plan or not, but will we be moving that to an actual written review, or do we plan to keep on having it be more oral?
Yes, in working with purchasing, we're going to work with them to formalize the process to review the contractor, make sure they're meeting all expectations. And
Councilmember, what we want to do is standardize this across the organization, obviously, with the checklist, because we basically have deferred the decisions to the department. We're going to have a checklist that has some check-in points and it has a certain level of documentation as part of the renewal process. Because staff, through the city manager's authority, can do up to 3 years, and so those are the steps.
Can I ask a question on the renewal before you go on to next topics? So can we get a better explanation of this renewal process? What I just heard was I'm not sure if I heard the words quite right. It was, do you say it probably was verbal?
it was most likely verbal. We did not.
Most likely verbal.
We did not. I do not have any documentation of the whole process and the discussions that was gone through.
So I need to understand this part more. This is a renewal for how many dollars total?
The contract was a total of $1.9 million. The first year of the contract was $652,000, and the second year would approximately be the same amount.
So it was ended up being about a $1.3 million renewal, and
Over 2 years.
Over 2 years, and that after we've been investigating this for how long? When did this come to light as a problem?
I might not be understanding your question, but I would say the auditor conducted the audit over the past few months.
Well, and so Utilities Department this was brought to your attention in that same time frame?
We were probably not focused on it in the way we should have been, and so yes.
So what I'm still taken back by is that all we've just received is a comment that it was most likely done verbally. It's a big deal. I really want to understand this better. How was it done?
The difficulty that we're having a little bit here is you don't have left on utility staff folks who were personally involved in a lot of this. A lot of them have retired and moved on. We have attempted to contact them and understand this a little bit better. And so their recollections are, and Tom, you will keep me straight on this, but that there actually was another IFB, invitation for bids, developed, but not issued because, as I understand it, the contract at that time had said, when faced with having to rebid, said, you know what, we'll honor our bid.
Okay.
What documentation do we have on this?
The actual.
Yes. What are our files look like on
So
this?
the
Our
department
city
submits
files.
a purchase request that becomes the purchase order.
So we only have a purchase request.
In
Right.
purchase order.
It becomes a purchase order because the contract's already for 3 years approved by council.
And this is what you found in your audit? You were able to review these documents?
We did not find evidence that that there was an effort to formally renew this contract at the anniversary dates after
You
the
found the
first year.
purchase, I'm sorry, what did you say you had a purchase?
Oh, I thought you were asking me what we do.
Yeah, I want to know what,
That's the process.
when we go to the files and we take the files out and we find all of our payments, when we made payments, when we approved a bill, that kind of thing. Where is that of course would be where that type of paperwork would be, but we're not finding it. So I just want to know what we do have available in our own filing system in order to reconstruct this experience that the auditor's gone through.
So, David Ramberg, Assistant Director of Administrative Services Department. So Lala referred to the purchase requisition process. So after whatever determination the department goes through, and this happened in this case, a purchase requisition is entered by the department in the SAP system. That then moves over to the purchasing division's work queue. And the purchasing division turn it into a purchase order. And that affects the renewal of the contract. that purchase order is printed out, and there's terms and conditions on that piece of paper. It's called a purchase order document, and that's put into the contract file. We have a contract file for Casey Construction. It includes the CMR with the original authority from City Council, and it includes all the bid documents as well that led up to the selection of Casey Construction, and it includes these renewal documents. The piece that wasn't completed on the renewal part that should have been by purchasing division is the request. Once the PO is affected in the system, we must then request a refresh of the bond certificate. And so I don't believe that that's specifically called out but that's what we've talked about with the city auditor. That piece was not completed in this case, but the other SAP transactions were completed to produce the purchase order, which affected the renewal of this contract based on City Council authority for 3 years. And that's the process we typically go through, and we get all the required documentation if a bond certificate needs to be renewed. It doesn't need to be in all cases, but we do go through that PR to PO renewal process. It's usually at the anniversary, prior to the anniversary of the contract, and a lot of these occur during the end of the fiscal year, which is usually around 6/30 of a given year. So the months of May and June are extremely busy processing these types of documents.
So I had an additional question as a follow-up, because Director Fong, you just described that part of the problem was that, or the problem is that the project manager or managers involved in this are retired and not with the department, and consequently it's difficult getting some of that information. I had read, and I don't know, was it in our city press release, I read it in the press, that part of the problem was that we had staff turnover and had new people, and that that was a major part of why this occurred. So I don't get how it can be both of those things. If it was, in fact, it's now that we can't get good information because people are retired, then it wasn't new people who renewed the contract, it was old people.
It was, sorry, the contract it went through the process that David Ramberg just described. We did talk to at least the engineering person who had retired, and he was the one who said, and he's no longer here. He's anyway no longer a regular staff person on this for the city, but he was one who had actually said that he recalled putting together an IFB at the time to rebid this, but again, it was his recollection that the contractor had agreed to honor the original bid. When I talk about the turnover, that really does have to do with how the contracts were managed. We did have, continue to have ongoing turnover, and
So is it, you're saying that the contract manager is not who was involved with the contract renewal?
That is, I'll have to ask Tom. That is my understanding, but you'll correct me.
Could you repeat the question?
I'm now confused. Was the contract manager who did the contract renewal, or is there another person who did the contract renewal?
No, the current contract manager was also here for the past contract. But the engineering manager who was helping him with this contract is retired and is no longer with the city.
Okay, so we have the current contract manager here. We don't have the engineering manager who oversaw the current contract manager.
Correct.
That's in the engineering side. On the operations side, I do think there was some handoff there, and maybe Dean can remind me.
Before we go on to the operations side, make sure I understand this, because this gets to one of the key issues for me. So we have the contract manager. does the contract, when I was asking the earlier question, actually, Councilmember Berman initiated this fine question, was how did this renewal occur? And what I was told was that we really aren't sure because the manager has retired, but the project manager's here. Are we saying the project manager doesn't know how it was renewed?
No, the contract manager does know how it was renewed. Revisiting your question about the meetings, it's not usually a single meeting where we talk about a contractor. We talk about contractors throughout the year to see and talk with operations to see how is that contractor performing on his work, to see, make sure that when it becomes the time for renewal, that do we want to renew that contract with that contractor. So it's not typically a single meeting where we sit down and talk about a contractor and see, do we want to renew it? It's an ongoing discussion that we have throughout the year.
Okay, so I've heard that the quality performance was good, but then it goes into this other issue of we move from a predominantly fixed price contract on something that has a undefined scope of work, which I want to understand more how that's a bit of an anomaly. But we went from that to a contract that in essence became a predominantly time and material contract. So there was a decision point somehow there. And I haven't heard any explanation around that. That's what I'm trying to understand better is how was that decision made? And the first responses were that we really aren't quite sure because we have a retirement. And now I'm understanding that the engineering manager is retired, but the contract manager is not. So I'm hoping we can still get better understanding of how that, it's not just the decision to renew, but the decision to renew in a way that became a fundamental change in the contract.
And can I ask a couple of questions that kind of lead into that, which is, I mean, along those lines, I believe the staff response said that during the first 6 months, staff tried to use the fixed cost items, but that this became too difficult and the decision was made to use the time and materials pricing that was supposed to take up only, I thought 10, but maybe more, well, no, I think it was 10% of the total contract. But I think somewhere else I read that it was mentioned that over the last 20 years, sometimes we've used fixed costs, sometimes we've used time and materials. Have we had this difficult of a time using fixed cost previously, when we've used it over the past 20 years? And if not, what made this time so different? Or if so, then why and if we have had problems over the past 20 years, why were we even trying to do it again?
I can't explain what happened or go back too far because I wasn't here at that time. But the contract before this one was a time and materials contract, and we dealt with a contractor who, as was mentioned in the audit, it's difficult to keep a contractor motivated to work on a time and materials contract. We attempted with Casey, for the Casey contract, to go with a fixed price. And in that fixed price contract, we developed bid items to define generic types of work, either trenching and putting in conduits, installing boxes, things like that. A lot of the bid items they would price it out, and we were hoping the contractors would price it out. And in most cases, they're looking at it as if they're installing it in a greenfield installation, no other utilities. In cases that we're dealing with, well, let me step back and explain this contract. It's been mentioned that this contract is different from a typical project, because a typical project, you have a defined scope of work. You used to give that scope of work to a contractor, they price it out, they go in and do field inspections, give you a fixed price for that contract. In this case, this is meant for, as a blanket contract, to be used on any project where we may have customer service, CIP, emergencies, or maintenance type work. So any of the engineers, anybody in operation, supervisors in operations can call on this contractor, ask them to give them a price estimate for doing some type of work. So it's difficult in that you're asking a contractor to give you a price for some work that could be in different situations. It could be in a greenfield where there's no utilities. It could be in downtown University Avenue where you have to deal with all kinds of underground utilities. And you may look at our typical primary conduits are 36 inches deep, but if you're in University Avenue, you may have to go 5, 6, 7 feet deep just to get underneath a water main or so it's difficult for them to price those out. So in those cases, in this contract, we were negotiating with the Casey to say, okay, this is our typical primary conduit depth, but in this case, you're having to go 8 feet deep. How do we negotiate the time and materials price for that additional work that they're going to have to expend on that? So rather than
I'm sorry, I think I'm going to get confused if we
Go too far.
well, if we start drifting from one valid subject into another valid subject. So that the first, we may have one question of whether it's a good idea or a bad idea to have this type of contract be a fixed bid or not. I think that's a different discussion from once we've had a contractual agreement that it is a fixed bid, that it morphed.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the merits of whether we should have had it a fixed bid or not should not really go predominantly into that discussion. I mean, I understand how in the midst of dealing with something there may be a recognition that you're having problems with this working as a fixed bid, but I have a real concern with just staff on their own turning it into something else.
Yes.
And so that my questions were around not whether it should have been a fixed bid or not. That's a valid discussion. But what was the process by which it got renewed and through that renewal got changed in its nature?
Well, when did it change? Did it change right off the bat?
Well, apparently 6 months in, it changed.
Well,
that's uncertain.
That's what the staff response said, I thought.
This is part of Lalo's comment.
Okay, so we can include that aspect of when it really changed. Did it change prior to the renewal? And so then you can include that in the clarifications that we're seeking.
I would say it did change prior to the renewal. It changed during the first year of the contract. As we started working with the contractor, we found that there were issues trying to work with the fixed prices, the fixed bid items.
And so I think that's what prompted, I think that's what prompted our former electric engineering manager to think that it might make sense to reissue an IFB and do it on time and materials. But then again, it's my understanding that at that point the contractor said they would honor their original bid.
Now,
But that's not what
if I could ask the question, admin services was involved in the original bidding process.
Correct.
So why weren't you involved in the renewal, or once it had begun to change character?
Typically, we are not in the current process unless an issue arises. If an issue arises, the departments get us involved, and then we make a determination whether we go forward and use the performance bond, because that's our protection, our safety blanket that we have there, or we get legal involved to help us resolve.
But admin services was not aware of the fact that
We were not informed that there were any
contract
issues.
was being used in a different.
That is correct. That's my understanding, right,
Correct.
Lalo?
That's correct.
From the get-go. But even prior to the renewal period, yes.
It was the utility's responsibility to go back out to bid and reissue it as a time and material. Time and material was an option within the initial bid, and that's what they're using. But utility, in hindsight, utilities should have gone back out to bid and bid it as a time and material so that we could.
Let
Let me just clarify, because I'm appreciating the fact that we're getting a little more direct here, but there's a tendency to sort of talk passively about this when it's really clear that there are some issues here. This wasn't just a matter of should have done something at the time of renewal. Let's be clear. Utilities is acknowledging that someone made a determination to not perform under the conditions of the bid award, which was awarded as a fixed price contract, and to operationalize it as a time and materials contract. So, you know, at whatever point in time that happened, we really were not complying with the terms of the bid. And in that sense, the auditor's point about the bid being executed not in accordance with the award is, 1,000% spot on and legitimate. And because of that, it is possible to conjecture or wonder, could there have been better value? Then subsequently, when there were other opportunities at normal renewal periods to renew this and do it in such a way that would have clarified that, that also did not happen over the 3-year period of this contract.
And at this point, we have replaced this contract with a time and materials contract.
Could I ask the auditor a question? Sure. I'm a little confused about the difference between time and materials and the bid line contract. I guess the bid line is not a fixed contract. It just says you'll do a unit of work, but in any project, the unit of work would be different. So
Okay.
there is a flexibility.
Correct.
In the bid line.
Let me explain. So what we're looking at here is when we say fixed price contract, specifically these were unit price line items, which is a type, a variation of a fixed price. It wasn't fixed price in the sense that, you know, we're gonna have this building or this project and it's gonna cost X. It was unit prices, a bid line item. For example, we would be doing this type of trenching, and the bid would have been, say, $2 per square foot or whatever it was, and that would include labor, materials, waste disposal. That's, in that sense, it's fixed price. Whereas the time and materials line items were strictly, you're gonna have a foreman, he's gonna cost you $20 or whatever, $100 an hour. You're gonna have a truck driver, he's going to cost this much. You're going to have this type of material, and these are the prices.
So is it correct
Yes.
to describe this kind of bid line as a formula that for a given task and whatever volume or amount of that task, there is a certain formula by which we're billed? It's per linear feet of a given type of pipe being laid, and that's the way this is set up. And so it's a bit of a hybrid between time and material and
But you
fixed
did
bid.
mention in the projects actually done, some of them on University Avenue went 7 feet down. Some of them had rock replacing dirt.
Mhm.
So each of these had some variations associated with it. So there was some flexibility in the contracting all the way through, wasn't there?
I mean, yes, I think the contract accounted for the different types of work. There were many different types of unit price. There wasn't one type of, there were many bid line items. Many of these were unit price or fixed price line items. So I think the contract appeared to me, I'm not an expert in this field, but appeared to me to try to cover many different types
Yeah.
of work in this area.
But the estimation of $281,000 loss actually doesn't take into account that there might have been variations in anyone's work on the project, anyone's total cost.
The $281,000 estimate makes couple of key assumptions. It assumes that the next bidder would have built the city in the same way, and they would have done the same in the same amount of work in the same period of time, and would have built the city in the same way. So that was a best estimate that we can come up with. Now, if the documentation were available to us to allow us to redirect all of the billing that was done and forecast or retrospectively estimate what it would have cost us had this work been done using those unit price line items which were supposed to be used, I would love to give you that estimate, but the documentation and the data doesn't support that kind of work.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, since I've done, construction accounting for over 20 years, obviously you know that this has alarmed me. This whole system has alarmed me. And particularly when I see the invoice, that you have copied here. And this is why I had the question, where are our job documents? It's typical to, like you say, you have the engineer's estimates, we see them all the time. One I can think of was San Antonio Road landscaping, engineer estimate, and then the bids come in and we get them lined up. Lalo does a nice job of lining them up. You can kind of see gaps. I remember one time seeing something that was off on one, and I said, why is this off by $20,000? Oh, they made a mistake, but they're going to cover it anyway. Okay, fine. So we get an invoice that looks like this, which is definitely time and materials invoice. This is not a progress payment invoice, which is what we're used to seeing with Mitchell Park, where we have a certain percentage of the job is finished, and so we're going to give you a progress payment, and we want to be paid. And then I noticed that we didn't take the 10% retention also. So it immediately seemed to morph right into time and materials, and I do believe that you were trying a new system. I think that's one of the things that's happened, is that this would typically been of time and material, but we thought, well, let's try to control our costs here. Let's send out the scope. We have our engineer's estimate. We get the bids back, but Casey, who you've worked with before, is this a new time that you're working with Casey Construction, or is it, I can't remember if this is new or not, or if they're an existing contractor.
We'd had other contracts with Casey.
Okay, so, and then it just went into the routine of the way you've always paid Casey. I'm not sure if there was really a decision to not do this. That's what's unclear to me. But I did want to ask, there should be a job file here. And so what does our job file look like with our invoices? Are they signed off by inspectors? Are they, what is this process that would be able to take this bundle and unpeel it to answer and resolve some of these? Because I know that when you've shown me spreadsheets on this, you have all of these engineering buckets of how much you're supposed to bid the job for that are blank. And then they go down to time and materials, and that's where we're coming into a gray area of what we could have saved or not could have saved and that type of thing. And so that's why I can understand why we don't really know if we saved or overpaid it. And it's true, it's unclear. It should be an engineer's, a time and material instead of
So was that a question, or?
So, well, I want to get back to how are our files here on this? Are we able to take a look at this, or so we have all of the documentation for paid bills and everything?
So there's two steps. Why don't I let the department talk about what files they keep and what they process for us to pay, and then I'll explain what we do once we.
Great, thank you.
I'd like to say, first off, this is not an invoice. This is an estimate that we get from the contractor. We give them a scope of work. We ask them to give us a price for doing that work, and this is one of their estimates for doing that scope of work.
So this is an estimate. We didn't pay off of this?
No.
And this is not, I'm sorry, I'm a little confused here. I thought that this was an example of one of the invoices they gave us. Am I wrong?
It's a quote.
It's a quote.
Okay.
It's a
But we shouldn't have a quote if we have a contract.
So.
Why does a quote become involved here then?
Okay, go ahead.
Like I said, this contract is a little different than a typical contract in terms of we don't have a fixed scope of work. We use this contract for several different projects as they come up during the year or over that 3-year.
So this is why we found that the scope of work was unclear in the original contract, but we don't have a copy of the contract here, right? In this report, you didn't give us a copy of the
I
contract.
think let me ask one question that may help clarify this one particular aspect. Is it true that even if this was properly done, we would have received, under the bid line scenario, a quote, but the quote would have been different from this? It would have been a quote based upon saying what was in the bid, the formula that's in the bid, but we still would have had for each project a quote.
Yeah, if we had probably a better defined list of bid items, we could have used the bid items like that. Yes, you're correct.
So, yeah, so the quote would exist even if this had all been done properly, but the quote would have looked different from
Right,
this.
I'm sorry, usually when you have a contract, you have phases, and you have
But this is a different, we went over that. This is a bid line, so this is where I was talking earlier about.
That's what bid lines usually do, though, they.
Well, on a formula. And so, if I understand this correctly, they say, the staff says, we anticipate having this scale of, or this volume of work that you're going to need to do, and you bid it for this type of job, your total cost in, that you will bill us for each linear foot of pipe that you lay, or whatever the metric is, you will bill us at that rate. And that's the way in which it's a fixed one. And then they would come back and say, okay, and we've just now had essentially a release that says, go do 150 feet of this type, and they come back with a quote that if it was done correctly would have looked differently from this. It would have, but it still would have been a quote for that 150 feet, but it would have been articulated consistent with the fixed bid in normal circumstances, except for that 10% of the time that's really outside the scope. Is that a correct characterization? Human,
Yes,
maybe from your perspective first?
I feel that you captured it correctly.
Okay.
And that this understood that this contract, the kind of work was going to vary. It was understood that the projects were not at the very beginning of the contract defined necessarily or completely defined. So there was, there was a need, and the contract actually specifies that there would be this process of having these quotes and having, this type of approval, as you put it, the release.
So we have a matching invoice to go with this quote then?
Yes, actually, in this case, I happen to have it. There is one. And there are, as we point out, several points to be alarmed about in the way that, these quotes were developed. And in this case, there is an invoice that fairly closely matches.
And we have invoices in all cases then? When we're making payment, we personally have the invoices as a city. So, okay.
So yes, there were invoices, but what we discussed in finding 4 is we were not able to match the work done with approved quotes.
Right.
And that entire process that we would expect there, especially if you were going to go with a time and materials
Right.
type of contract, you would have a much higher level detailed controls.
Okay.
So.
Davian, Senior Management Analyst for Utilities. So I have a copy of a sample bill here. So basically what it shows is the work order, the street address that's being worked on, and the time cards of the people who worked on there, and their exact number of hours, and the billing hours they are charged, and that matches the invoice. So throughout this contract, I think we had over 200 work orders, so they're all going to be different, but there are documents and time cards for each of these work orders. So I'd be happy to show this around.
And then,
That might be good for us to
Yeah.
just have a feel for that.
and then going back to Vice Mayor Shepherd's question about contract files, Tom, can you explain what the contract manager keeps in terms of contract files?
Since there are multiple engineers that work on, that utilize this contract, each engineer has their own job files. Each estimator may have their own job files. Currently, we've changed that to where we've centralized it and we have that contract manager. But during this contract with Casey, everybody had their own files, everybody had their own invoices. Operations had copies of their invoices and time cards, so we did not have them in a central location for the auditor to review.
So what happens then after the department has an invoice and they deemed it that it's ready to be paid, they sign off on the invoice, they hard copy that, send it, enter into the system, SAP. In SAP, we have an indicator of whether it's a valid contract, and and then it also pings to make sure that there's money in the cost center to pay it. If we get an invoice, we check to make sure that it's a valid contract, that it's an active account, and there's funds, and then we issue the payment.
But there's no, like, I noticed there's no quote, so we should have had a quote for this invoice. There's no quote attached to this. I see somebody has signed off on it, but the inspectors haven't, it's, and I see the work here, but it still is not telling me the picture of, and then, of course, this is all time and materials, whereas council has awarded the, the construction style.
Yeah, so we don't have the contract in our facility here at City Hall on the 4th floor. We don't.
So utilities has the contract.
Well, we have a contract, but it's not in the payables area. The utilities should have a contract, we should have a contract as well. But we're not tying into that level of detail. We are expecting the departments are doing that.
Sure, they need to approve it because they understand the language of what it is
It's
that
more
they're putting in.
technical.
Yeah, it's too
Correct.
technical, but there still should be a handoff and a sign-off so that, you have the confidence to go ahead and issue the payment that the work was performed, based on the CMR, so, okay.
I just want to make a clarification on the contract. So on the IFB bid, there was actually 69 line items, and the first 43 were fixed bid or fixed priced. The remaining 69 minus 4, the other 26 or so, or the other 26 line items are actually time and material. So it was a hybrid contract. So it wasn't just a fixed price contract.
Right.
It was both.
And that's where, and I was trying to recall the details from the auditor's report that broke down, there was both that number of line items, but then I thought that
I thought it was
the auditor,
90-10.
That it ended up, even though it's the number of items that were fixed versus the ones that were time and materials were maybe 2 to 1 or 3 to 1, that it was a 90% dollar amount for the fixed
Correct.
bid line items.
Correct.
Right, but the contract allowed for both time and material and fixed.
Yes.
Well, okay,
Technically.
so then I want to go back to this clarification, because I think in this conversation, each time we're not getting what sounds to me to be reconciliation. I want to pause and see if we're all on the same page. So, Mark, can you explain your contention that it was the dollars were 90% fixed bid, even though the number of line items were only 70% or something like that?
That is correct. There's a couple points. One is that the invitation for bid document made it very clear. Bid items 1 to 43 shall be the primary method of pricing all work as a result of this bid. So that's the first piece. The second piece is when you look at the way the bid itself was constructed. So the way it was constructed is that there were estimates in terms of, linear foot, how much work the city wanted. Those estimates for these fixed price line items were multiplied by the bid submitted. And that's how we ended up with a very large dollar amount that influenced the total amount of the bid. It happens that the time and materials...
For all of the bidders, you mean?
For all of the
Yes.
bidders. So for the time and materials line items, we had an estimate of 1. Like, 1 hour, 1 hour, 1 hour. And that's why these time and materials line items had minimal effect on the total amount of the bid, and that's how we came up with the 10%.
Okay, so I think it's important that if that's the case, now if the perspective is still different in the utilities department from that, then we'd like to hear that. But if it's the case that even though 30% of the bid line items were time and materials, 90% of the bid dollars were fixed line bids. Is that your understanding as well?
Yes. The time and materials were meant to augment any of the fixed line items that didn't meet.
So from my perspective, the percentage of line items that were time and materials is not terribly relevant. It's what percentage of the dollars. This was, from a dollar standpoint, a 90% fixed dollar for bid lines. I mean, and this is, as has been explained, what's unusual about this is the city gave an estimate that says, we think we're going to have this many 100 or 1,000 feet of this type of line installed this year, and for each foot of this type, you would charge this amount. That's the nature of this bid line. But it's an estimate of how many feet, and if we had fewer feet or more feet, then the amount that they would actually charge us against that bid line would go down or up. And I just maybe one other clarification that morphs into this other question about what the council was told, but it is affected by this. The original staff estimate was, as I understand it, $1 million, and then when it came to council, it was $800,000. What drove that change in estimate?
Well, let the department.
Because I think
Yeah.
I suspect some of that is related to the estimated amount of work as opposed to the dollars per metric, per linear foot or whatever.
The original $1 million estimate that was put out there was based on historical expenditures, what we think we would spend on this contract over a given year. During that time that between when we went out to bid and when we prepared the CMR for the council, there was a change in, as was mentioned with the economy, the amount of work that was going on, and it was kind of obvious in the actual work that we spent. We only spent $250,000 that first year. So we had reduced the estimated expenditures for that first year down to $800,000.
I think in retrospect, what we should have done is said it was bid at $1 million, and here's how it compares to that bid. But we expect to only use $800,000 based on the activity. I think that's the lesson learned out of this.
I agree. If I could just, before I lose this thought, sorry. Tom, as I recall, you've instituted different contract management practices where you're requiring anyone who requests anything under that contract to double check it against contracts right now. Maybe you could describe, this is a going forward.
We want to hear a lot of that.
We have implemented some processes. We've worked with our engineers to make sure that they're all familiar with the contract, all the bid items, all the time and material items, that they're familiar with that. So when they do request an estimate from the contractor, that they do check it against that. Also to check the estimate for accuracy, to check to make sure that what they're planning on doing is really a reasonable cost for doing that work. And we have gone back to them and negotiated and talked about the work that they're planning on doing and say, this doesn't seem reasonable, take a look at it again, and they have come back with lower prices. So we are dealing more with our contractor, the current contractor, to make sure that we're closer they're giving us closer estimates. The estimates that we're getting, they're not necessarily quotes. They have been in the past, and even now, not to exceed prices. So we actually pay the actual cost of doing the work, but we do get not to exceed price, or they have been giving us not to exceed prices for the work.
I just have one question then. Have you been able to audit the work that you have right now, and are there any, and I know that this is an expansion from this, are there any that you found to be out of compliance with the way they were presented to City Council? for approval?
No.
So so the audits that are active right now? Okay, good.
There was a first half to the question. I think you meant to answer both at once, but, so the first one, have you reviewed them?
We have reviewed them. As part of this process, even before this process, we've started to review
Everybody's in
all the
compliance
projects
with the
going up.
CMRs that we got and approved, and so we are, okay.
Can I just add
sorry.
something? Could we just be a little clearer about when you say these contracts, what you mean when you say these contracts? I mean, is this the whole world of contracts within utilities, or is this within these
The ones
range
the
of
council has approved.
all of the? Are you asking for all of the utilities contracts that the council has approved? I'm just trying to get it clear so that the question and the answer match up.
Well, this was an experience where we approved a CMR with a contract, and then it went off on a different journey than what we were faced with, you know, I think it was 2009, so but I'm part of the body of whatever council does for the last 100 years. So, this means.
That's okay, it didn't go offline until after you arrived on council.
Yes. I knew that in my head, I knew it too. No, but well, yeah, exactly, it's, so I guess this is an important question for me. And I don't know if you do spot checks on this, because I don't even actually know how many active contracts you have. But
So I think we have close to 200 contracts.
100 contracts.
I think there might be a way to frame this slightly differently that would provide clarity. There are contracts that are fixed bids in the true sense.
Right.
This is this anomaly of a fixed line bid. How many other fixed line bid contracts do we have? And in particular, have we reviewed all those? Because I think, Nancy, if we have a fixed bid contract, you may not have an exact
Where
number.
you
but we
retain
need
the
some.
10% retention, which was not done here, all of the things
Right.
that
And that's
council
not what this
approved.
was. This was.
This is our only fixed line bid contract with a time and material option. This is the only one. It's unique.
Well,
And
actually,
utilities.
usually everybody has a time and material at the bottom of a contract, to fix bid contracts, in order to be able to capture, you know, miscellaneous things that they didn't consider in the bid. So I guess what I'm saying is, if you're asking us to approve through a CMR process a fixed bid, which does include, you know, a portion of it being time and materials, is there anything being handled differently than what we were presented? Like in this case, again, we were supposed to have a 10% retention, the way I understand it. That didn't happen. So, and, you know, there's two different departments here that should have some type of checks and balances to notice that, you know, we're supposed to pull retention and hold it till the job is over. So, and you're telling me that you've gone through all of your active contracts and they are functioning the way they were presented to council when they were approved?
We've reviewed all our construction contracts so far, not all our contracts. I think we're still reviewing.
Right, so we have commodities contracts, we've got some contracts with energy efficiency, and these folks wouldn't deal with those. And so they've looked at all the contracts that are under their responsibility. Correct.
Thank you.
May I just make one comment? I
Looks
just
like
wanted to
a
make
problem.
sure, and Dave, maybe you guys can help. This particular contract, which was, and we were just in some discussion about the fact that it was really bid as a, when we were talking about the 90-10 and all of that stuff, it was bid as a fixed bid contract. But I think the audit and the response to the audit is very clear that it was not executed as a fixed bid contract. So clearly that's the preliminary and major failure in this particular project. Once it was being exercised as a time and materials contract over a 3-year period, over a 3-year period, we spent a total of approximately $1.9 million, as I understand that. Now, Dave, you or somebody just said there were 200 projects then during that, as part of that $1.9 million worth of expenditures.
That's correct.
Okay. So what's the right number for that? It's about $10,000 or something, or about $10,000 on average per contract. Now, that might not be the average contract. You might have a much different distribution where you had a $100,000 contract and you had a $4,000 contract. I don't know what that distribution is. And then, again, not making any excuses, but as I sort of understand this, this is almost like a retainer type concept that for troubleshooting when things would pop up. So you would want to be able to have these guys to come in to be able to say, we've got a problem on University Avenue, go over. They would give you a quote or something. Here's our estimate of the time we're going to do it. Then ultimately, when they were done, they would give you an invoice. We spent 20 hours out there doing the job or whatever, and it cost X thousands of dollars for us to do that. And over a 3-year period, we ended up spending $1.9 million. So we had this initial problem of the fact that, well, that wasn't the way it was bid, so was that fair to the other bidders, really? I mean, that happened, clearly a big issue. And then how do we know that we got real value and that they delivered on the work that they did because of the record keeping and everything we had? So I think that's really important. On the other hand, we need to remember there were 200, supposedly at least 200 different projects being done, and if they were on average around $10,000, I'm not saying that lets me rest more easily, but I just think that's something we should just kind of keep that in mind.
So when the invoice got passed around, on the front page it said okay to pay, handwritten in. Why was it okay to pay? How was that determination made? And do we have any record keeping that discusses that?
This is basically a signature from the engineer project manager. He gets the invoice. He gets this invoice from Casey Construction. He reviews it with operations. The operations supervisor checks it against the time cards. The engineer checks it against the scope of work. Operations supervisor is checking to make sure that the work is done. Their inspectors have checked the work. The work was done in accordance with the scope of work that was presented. They're checking it against the time cards that are submitted by the contractor each day for the work that was completed. And then they sign it off also, and then it's given to the engineering to review it against the scope of work and against the quote.
And do we have a paper trail that shows those steps and what?
We have separate paper trails.
Right.
Operations has a paper trail, engineering has a paper trail.
Okay.
So we did not have a central location where we kept all the drawings, all the scopes of work, all the invoices, all the estimates. We're working on
But we're changing that.
You've centralized it now.
We are centralizing
So if you were
it
to
now.
pick up that invoice now, there would be a lot more to see to support
We would,
a one little line item of $18,000, which, because that's not a very substantive invoice. It doesn't say what you did, doesn't.
well, the invoice should have the service order that's attached to it. The service order package would have all the drawings associated, substructure drawing that's the scope of work that they're performing, and then we would have everything, right now we would have everything together.
Councilmember Schmidt?
Just a note about why this is important. These projects are all development projects, aren't they?
They're a combination of both. Majority are customer service projects. We do use them for maintenance, and we do use them for some CIP projects, capital improvement projects.
So a good number of them are paid for by developers who have the option of doing it themselves or coming to the city.
Yes.
But I guess they're putting confidence in the city that we are operating at an efficient and effective level.
Yes.
So it's important to note when we're in that situation that we operate well.
Okay. So if we've kind of hit that topic area, I had one that I wanted to return to, which is over this question of whether, based upon accepting this bid from a bidder that the auditor has argued is the I'm trying to remember the term of art, it's the lowest responsible bidder, right? That it says that we may have resulted in additional costs of approximately $281,000. And I've read this several times, and I need to understand how that flows. I mean, we basically had and I'm recalling, let me put it in the context again, and I think Lalo and Jim had already mentioned this. In this time frame of 2009, 2010, we went from, up until the financial crisis, we were consistently getting bids in public works and utilities, I assume as well, that were over our engineering estimates. Each year they kept going, and we'd raise them, and the cost would go up even higher. And so we had a consistent pattern of bids coming in above estimates. And I recall former Public Works Director, I mean, I remember that more than the utility side, but it was all in the same tenor. In 2009, as we had bids on the storm drain repair system, where we had fallen behind in delivering what we had anticipated being able to provide for that bond measure.
And running out of money because
and
of
running
that.
out of money, and within 2 years, because these bids came in so low, we caught up. And I seem to even remember a fire station repair and things like that. They were drastically below engineering estimates. Actually, they came in below, and engineering departments started revising downward their estimates, and they came in below even.
That's correct. That's my
very
recollection.
significant amounts below that. So that scenario was real at the time, and so it's a cause for additional scrutiny. I mean, we look back and we go, okay, this was a very disruptive period, and we as a council talked publicly about, wow, this is really good. Should we see if there's any way that we can accelerate projects to take advantage of these prices that are being bid apparently not just at cost, but we had contractors who were stating, I am deliberately doing this below my cost to keep my employees intact. And that was a public discussion that we had repeatedly. So when we have a very low bid, it's still a cause for a flag. And even though we may say this is a great opportunity for us, we have to make sure that those bidders who may be bidding below their cost or at their cost aren't going to come back and make it up some way, by hook or otherwise, over the course of the contract. So there's a basis for us to have additional scrutiny when we get that. But I think those are all good points that we should have that scrutiny. It was also the reality of that context. But how is it that we approximately lost $281,000 by getting a bid that was so much below everybody else? So, Human, can you walk me through that? Because I want to make sure I understand that right.
Okay. So before I directly answer that, I want to just give a little bit of background. In the case of Casey Construction, everyone else's bid was above the city's estimates, both of the estimates. It was Casey's bid that was significantly below everything. And they came forward and said, we made a huge mistake. So, they admitted. So it wasn't in this case.
Okay. So it's a combination.
But
yes.
wait a second, I heard the timing on that was different. Your version is right away they said it, but then,
Before the contract was awarded, they said it.
They said it.
We're in agreement in that.
okay.
So then, okay, so.
But the question, I don't mean to interrupt you, do we know why they said that?
Because according to Casey, according to the notes we have, they misunderstood certain line items. In one instance, they said we thought we were building a parking lot. When we look at the line items on a one by one basis, all of these, you can see specifically on certain line items, they were, by a factor of a huge factor below.
Would they have
The
had
other-
any knowledge of, by that point in time, of what the other bids were?
Presumably no, because it came to their attention when the bids were opened. According to Casey, we had the discussion with them. They found out that they had made a huge mistake when the bids were opened, and they realized, oh, we are somehow way below everyone else. We need to look at this again. And that's.
No, but I'm asking a different question.
Mhm.
If they saw that they were way below everyone else, I mean, we need to be careful to know what they're informed they're thinking about. We made a big mistake. Because I'm not defending them, but ultimately they still decided to stay in with that for whatever reason. If we were on a track to potentially reject their bid for whatever reason, they decided to send us a letter saying that they would stay in. Whether that was made sense or not, whether we should have been more aggressive and said, well, forget it, we don't think you're reliable, you're grasping, or
Right.
whatever.
So that's along the lines of what I'm trying to understand. So once they agreed to stay in,
Yes.
how did we still have the 280 additional costs when they agreed to take a haircut?
Okay. Because this is a retrospective analysis. This is looking back and using the line items that they did actually choose to build the city. They built the city using line items where they were actually more expensive than the second bidder, and that's what accounts for the $280,000. The line items that they were significantly below the second bidder, the line items that really gave them the unfair advantage, if you will, those were either minimally used or not used at all in some instances. And that's what
how
accounts.
you derived the
Correct.
270.
Correct.
So I really don't want to get in, because this is the only part of the audit I had an issue with, because it still involves some conjecture. It presumes that the second bidder would have stayed static in that environment also, and might not have been in a situation where if they had been awarded the bid, that they might have actually had different pricing. We're comparing actual billing versus a bid. So we're saying here's a bid. So we don't know for certain that in real life that second bid. We're saying that compared to the bid, the city lost money, could have lost money.
So, and here was, and this is maybe a bit nuanced, but I think it may be important, where your report said that we may have, it resulted in 281 additional costs, is that it may have resulted in up to 281 additional costs. Is that an accurate statement? Because based on your analysis, it sounds like it could have been that much, but we don't, based on, for instance, the way the city manager just described it, we don't know what the other bidders would have done.
That is correct. That's why, we've really been trying to careful and nuanced in how we, even footnoted that figure to explain that there are these underlying assumptions. So you are correct. In reality, of course, if they had, built the city using the unit price items, would have had a totally different result. This was the best estimate that we could do given the situation.
Councilmember Schmidt?
Are we ready to move to the section about what is to be done?
Yeah, I am. And should we just take them from finding one and go through them, or should we, bounce around?
Does that seem all parties to
I'm on page 28. Is that where the
go
graph?
one each finding
Yeah, and then there's
category at a
this
time?
city manager action plan. Does that work, or did you
On
think
the
we should go to
matrix?
the back for the response? This,
What would be the best way to discuss going forward?
Probably, if I may, I believe probably the quickest way would be the city manager's action plan. The narrative response has a lot of background.
in the back.
Yeah, so the
So,
matrix,
what
I think
page?
page 28 is right.
Oh, 28 is right, okay.
Yeah,
So maybe you could just take us through.
Well, sorry.
Can I ask a quick kind of process question, I guess, which is, we have the audit recommendation follow-up process. To what extent do we, and I think we saw that recently, I can't remember in what context, to what extent do we normally discuss those items and actually ask for more in-depth reports on those items, or can that be taken on a case-by-case basis?
So we normally get good reports, And I would say normally, we only discuss certain things that either the auditor has specific issues with, or the committee has specific issues with, that the other things that are reported and seem to be tracking well.
Oh, sure.
Don't usually go into great discussion.
Yeah.
I suspect that this will be one that we'll want to be looking for good frequency and depth of follow-up and perhaps additional discussion.
Yep.
All right. Jim, did you want to,
I think it's best for. Why don't I start on the first one?
Responsible staff to speak to.
Right. I think on the first one, Councilmember Berman, let me address your comments you made at the beginning, because I think you made an important point when there's a discrepancy of X%. So that was one of the first questions I asked staff. Hey, can we look to see, do we have any kind of standards out there that? And the answer is no. I also asked Human, and he can answer from the limited research you might have done.
I'm not aware of a percentage.
Yeah.
I'm aware of various procedures,
Right.
flow charts people use, decision kind of, flow charts.
And so that's probably more what we'll do, because it's very subjective, and we'll look because there's going to be different rules for different type of contracts. Go ahead.
Well, I just don't understand necessarily what that means. I mean, I understand it's subjective, but at what point do you determine whether something needs more in-depth analysis or not?
And that's the standard that we're going to work on and develop and come back to you with our responses as to what we've done and what we laid out. In the construction contracts, there's almost a self-check mechanism that is already built in. They check themselves. They file protests. In our muni codes, there's a protest process that's already in place, and it leads all the way up to the city council. And in the 5 years that I've been here, I think I had one a year that I've gone in front of you to either defend our position on the award or not.
What do you mean who files protests?
So
I don't
let's
understand.
let's just take this contract as an example.
Yeah.
Casey was awarded. Any of the other bidders would have filed a protest, said they're not responsible bidder. Look at the price. It's crazy. It's not in line. Why are you awarding to them? And so we have to respond within. They have to file a protest within 7 days, and it goes to the purchasing manager. Within 10 days of his or her response, then it comes to my position. And then if I give them the response and they don't like my response, then they go to council directly.
Okay, and I mean, I think that's good. I don't necessarily want to rely on the market.
No, I'm just saying that we're going to set up. We're agreeing with you. We're going to set up formal processes and steps. But I was also saying, in addition to that, there's also a market.
I'm with you.
Process. One prime example that you typically get until this latest potential change: prevailing wages. We were getting a lot of contractors from the Central Valley coming in. And we're significantly lower than the other Bay Area construction firms. And you would have the labor groups come in here and telling you, this is not fair. We have talented, skilled, unionized, certified electricians and blah, blah, blah. And you're going to pay more money for a contract for inferior work.
Mm-hmm.
And we did it, and we got the project. So, what do I do with that? So there's going to be judgment calls on our award. But I think you see a listing of the things, of the next steps. In addition, we're also having independent review by another firm that does best practices for purchasing.
Where are you with the independent review? Are you?
He's under one, I think, aren't you?
I don't see
You mean
that.
the independent review comment that I made?
Yeah.
I think it's in addition to.
Oh.
Yeah, it's in addition to that.
Bar area.
Yeah, and so we're working with the team that Jim told you already, with the assistant city manager, the HR directors, CIO, and we're making city attorney. Thank you. Sorry, Molly. And so we're already making strides as to what areas we're going to review, the training. During the budget process, reductions, we cut out the trainer in the training program and the assistant. And that's when we had formal training for contract management, project management. management leadership. So we got to reinstitute those things. So you're probably going to start seeing some requests for resources to put these processes back in place, because we need it citywide, not just in utilities, not just in ASD. And so those are part of the steps we're taking forward to address the first part.
Just a note on the bidding process.
Yes.
Because there were at least 3 contracts during that period, 2009-10, where issues were raised of bids moving apart. And I can't say we made the best choices. And, you know, some of them we did, some we didn't. So to set up a standard, I think will be tough and difficult.
It is, and I mean, in talking to some of the contractors, they tell me, you know, I know that some of the times I'm going to make a mistake and I'm going to lose my pants. They tell me that literally. The one great example I gave you, and my hope is that I make it up on the next one, and you know, it evens out. If I keep making those mistakes, I'm not going to have a job.
Yeah, I mean, here it seems to, because we don't have any written anything, you know, the only anecdotal evidence we have is that staff told the contractor, we'll make it up to you on time and materials. So it doesn't sound like the contractor came and said, hey, I'm okay with taking a haircut.
Yeah.
I mean, and
I'm not sure that we have that whole scenario. We have the contractor saying that.
Yeah.
We had another meeting that supposedly the contractor agreed to so I haven't heard clarity on that.
But we don't have documentation.
I agree 100%. There's no clarity on anything because nothing's written down.
We don't have documentation, so back to your point, we need to formalize these discussions, these steps, follow them up formally, have it all formalized in a procedure. So
bottom line is ASD is taking responsibility for this number 1.
For the formalizing the bidding contract, correct.
And for establishing this criteria to try to signal whether or not there are problems really that need to be investigated with more rigor, you know, to ensure that you do have a responsible bid.
Yeah, and there's going to be a threshold where it gets elevated to myself, and then from myself, I have to elevate it to the attorney's office or CMO, city manager's office, if there's issues. And we've done that, it's just not formal.
Both of these are a little tied together, these two on this one, first page, because I want to go into the second one, which is preparing the CMR for council. And sometimes we get engineer's estimate and then the different bids that come in, and then they get, sometimes like Public Works will disqualify one because they, you know, they just didn't even address a certain component of the scope, and so it wasn't there for them to tie together with the engineer's estimate. And I guess I do find that to be useful when I'm going through the contracts. And so is that standardized then? Because sometimes we don't get them and sometimes we do. So is that possible to, if you don't have that because it's a different type of contract, at least explain what kind of contract we're being asked to approve so that we can have the confidence that we know how it's going to be administered, you know, after we see it, after our eyes go away and you guys go off and do.
Our goal is to show you everyone, and the templates are that way. Part of it is addressing the staffing turnover, the training, and, you know, a CMR's coming in late, and it goes into the queue.
Right.
And we say, you know, we don't have time for purchasing to review it, or you know, there's a squeeze, and can one get by? Yeah, you know, I can see something like that happening. But I think the key thing here is, again, to reemphasize it in the training, make sure that everyone understands where the template is, because the goal is to be transparent without.
We should be asking for it if we don't see it, then that's our final double check.
Well, we should do it before you.
You're absolutely right, but that should also be something that we should be able to. Did you want to say something, Molly, or no? I thought.
Well, I was going to mention that the city attorney is someone on her staff who reviews most of the memos, I think, and certainly all of our memos. Can I just say, much as we crunch the city manager and we give him these things, it just a matter of a few days before they actually have to get published, and he's got to read them all. He really does read them all. He kicks back stuff Now, often he kicks back stuff to us and he says, I don't really understand this piece. You need to explain it a little bit better. I don't have to see it again, but could you make sure you explain it better? And so he's like the final test before it goes to you, but trust me, before it even goes to him, and my staff will attest to this, I frustrate the heck out of them because I, too, will push back hard on things I don't understand. Probably in this case, I didn't realize we had redone the estimate, or I would have pushed back on that, because it is, as Lalo says, our goal to be really transparent. We're not trying to hide anything here. I just probably didn't know. Otherwise, I would have said, and they know I would have said it. You need to explain this all a little bit better. And so there is a painful vetting process that we go through before you all see it, and we do miss stuff, but in that painful vetting process, they've rewritten it several times before it actually gets issued.
If I could ask the auditor, these contracts, the larger contracts, show up usually on the consent calendar for the council. Are you satisfied with the oversight the council could provide?
Am I satisfied with the oversight that council can provide? I'm not sure
I'm not sure if that's a fair question for the auditor. That's a council policy decision. We're provided these reports. The council makes the decision whether to pull something off of consent. The council has within its purview to decide whether certain categories of things would no longer be on consent routinely and not be. That's not the auditor's decision at all.
Well, I'm asking the auditor who has done an audit of contracts, whether during that audit you were satisfied with the process of council oversight.
I can't comment on council's processes, as you know. I can say that I do think about all of the contracts that you do receive on consent, and I think it's very intimidating when I think of, making a judgment, and if there is any way that humanly you could know all of the challenges and potential pitfalls, it would be very difficult. In the case of this particular audit, I feel like the staff report was not accurate and transparent to give you the opportunity to exercise the judgment or to raise concerns about this contract.
Okay.
Chair Burke, could I just
Yes.
add, since someone raised legal review as to form, so we are in the queue to review all CMRs. I think that's routine, and on rare occasions we will not do that for a variety of reasons, but it's typical that we do that. But I just feel compelled to use this moment to talk a little bit about what we are doing and aren't doing when we're doing that work. We're of course looking for any legal issues that are raised by the material that's being brought forward to the council. We're also assisting the staff to ensure that all of their documents are clear and enforceable and that they comply with law. We don't have a mechanism, and we don't want anyone to be under the impression that the attorney's office is in a position to be doing a review of factual matters that are brought forward by the department, such as what is their intended amount of work, what's the nature of the work, that we don't investigate those items and we don't inquire as we are reviewing really right before the city manager, something that's getting put together in your packet. We just don't have the capacity to, and I don't think it's really our role. We haven't been asked to do that. So I just want everyone to understand. Sometimes folks feel that when the city's lawyers have looked at something, it's sort of a good housekeeping seal of approval in all respects. And it's something short of that in some areas. And we really are relying on other folks in the work process for some of the items that are being forwarded onto that process. So, thank you.
Just a closing comment on the recommendation one, number 2. We use an online system called MinuteTrack to direct these city managers' reports to you. And we're not, purchasing is not a mandatory reviewer because not everything needs to be reviewed by purchasing, not everything's a contract. So the departments need to designate us as part of the review of a contract. And that's what I meant, that sometimes, you know, it gets bypassed because we're not part of that if we're not get inserted. We're gonna try to keep reminding departments to make sure that they put us through that process. Number 1.3, I think we're in agreement. That's why the CIO is part of the committee, to help us see what we can do in terms of getting additional tools to help us. 2.4.
Can I stop
Sure.
before we leave one? One of the findings also was that there was a weak scope. How is that being reconciled?
That's a very difficult
I know, it's
challenge,
subjective.
because that's
Yeah.
part of the challenge that we have is we want things done fast and get it going faster. Well, some of these steps are gonna slow things down.
Right.
And you gotta understand that, we gotta understand that, the community needs to understand that. These extra steps add time. The challenge has been, and it's been difficult with some of my colleagues, because they're saying, we're the experts, we have the technical expertise, you don't. Let the scope be our domain. You worry about the other parameters and let it go. Well, at times, just using the experience and, you know, some judgment call, we may push back. So there's some of that, but for the most part, you know, we do have to rely on the technical experts on getting the scopes done. So I don't feel that I can assure you that I can capture a scope and grasp it and say, you know, this is, that we're gonna, you know, refine it.
Well, Ramon, how did you catch the weak scope? What was that? What was it that caught your eye on that?
Can you explain, I'm not sure exactly what you mean by the weak scope.
It's in the details earlier. The scope was, I don't know. I'm sorry, I don't have it. Oh, there it is, outside the scope of the audit. I'm sorry.
Page 23 of the packet.
Oh, it was maybe page 23,
Okay. Oh, that was further on. Okay, so we haven't gotten to that yet.
so you're talking about finding one?
I thought it would have been covered in 91, but it looks like it's further on. So maybe it'll come up in 94.
Okay, let's go ahead.
So I think, you know, here is, we're gonna implement the policies and procedures to be reviewed, and evaluate the contract work every 12 months and at a minimum. I think this is the one where the lesson learned, if we knew that a flag was raised, as you mentioned earlier, then, you know, we need to think about following up on that much earlier. Because we need to start looking at enforcing the performance bonds, bidding, or whatever needs to be done. And we're going to create a monitoring checklist that we will be requiring as part of this PRPO process. They will have it go into the contract file, and we're going to develop different sets of criteria of where we want the departments to respond to, you know, such as are the terms and conditions that were originally bid being met. You got to check it off, and you got to sign it off. That kind of type of form. And just illustrating one point that there'll be more factors.
I'll choose this opportunity to just emphasize the compliance with the contract. I mean, you know, Valerie mentioned that performance seemed to be being done quite well. You know, the contractor was doing the work, but the contract was obsolete the minute that we decided to move it to time and materials. And I had questions that aren't really relevant about, you know, whether or not there's a termination clause in the contract, and, you know, at the least it should not have been renewed. Just based solely on the fact that we were no longer operating under the contract that the council approved. So, yeah, I mean, I know that's in here, but I just want to emphasize, don't let performance overshadow compliance with the contract.
So you should probably be talking to me on that one, and we will be paying much closer attention to that.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you. But, and thank you, should that be captured? Or is that adequately captured? What's the
I think we said performance, but I think we need to expand on what that means to encapsulate what you're saying. And that's part of our intent all along. I mean, because that's the nature of the issue. My point is, if we would have followed, or my response to you is, if we would have followed the contract that it was met, we probably would have been in a meeting with the contractor at some point saying, we're going to push on your performance bond if you don't do something.
Well, it's also compliance with contract.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Can I just make a comment here too? Just to go back to something the chair talked about, the way these audits work is we're going to go through this tonight. We're going to identify, we're trying to get clarified as much as possible so that the committee understands what the staff is saying in response. But then we are going to be coming back, I'm sure, for an update as to where we are. Particularly this particular audit is not going to be satisfied, in my view, and we leave here. So there will be opportunities to do further follow-up, say, based on the addition of what Lalo just said right then, for you to be able to come back and say, well, really, okay, now is this what's really being implemented? So there'll be more than one bite at this, I think, on this particular audit. Actually, there are sometimes we actually very directly disagree with the auditor and might even say, we're not going to do that. We don't think it's warranted. But as you look at all of this, almost everything is saying we've got to make changes.
And I think to give assurances to you and to the community, what this will accomplish too is the accountability process that is kind of not apparent as to who said what, who did what, and that's what this will also allow us to have for my department and for the departments in the organization. I think I'll turn 3.5 to Val.
Okay, thanks very much. Yeah,
Sure we know where you are.
on finding number 3, and it's recommendation number 5, and I believe we shared all this with the city auditor. I don't think the city auditor took issue with at least some of the steps we're proposing here, but I didn't hear anything back from the city auditor on that. We are formalizing our process and really looking hard at who does what and what their responsibility is in terms of implementing contract terms. It was a little bit odd. The auditor told me that he saw our flow charts and some of our diagrams, but we wanted you to see that we're really trying to put some discipline behind some of these roles and responsibilities, and making sure this is something that survives a retirement around here. We're also, as I mentioned earlier, in the process of hiring contract utilities administrator. That person will reside in the engineering area. We hope we have somebody on board within this month, and we'll be similarly identifying contract administration positions in our operations and our customer support services area. You'll see that through the budget process. We have operations and customer service both have contracts as well. Some are shared with engineering in the case of operations. We're developing better tracking mechanisms so that we can monitor contractor work and make sure that the invoices that we're paying are invoices that should be paid. And we've listed here under bullet points things that we plan to track very carefully. Drawings, scope of work, service order, work estimates, change orders, and explanations, and we will demand the explanations, and we will review the invoices and payments very carefully. We'll also want to be able to explain any cost variances, and contractors, employees for contractors come and go, so we are going to document who we're talking to when we're working with the contractors.
A question between 4 and 5, ASD, one side, utility on the other.
We will keep complete files. I'm going to look to Tom Ting. I'm assuming we're going to keep very complete files for our projects. I think you'll keep the invoice, the payments, and that piece of the tracking mechanism, which we'll actually have mirrored in our files as well. But yeah, we will be the file holder for the contracts that we're managing.
And that's how every department is. And until we convert everything electronically, my folks won't have access to this data. One area that we're exploring, and this is part of the review that we're talking about best practices in the third party, is does it make sense to add a resource to do spot checks? And because we don't have the resources to look at everything, every contract. I think that's probably clear. But if we add a resource, what is the cost of that resource to mitigate some of this potential risk? All of this is a business decision that every business has to make as to how much do you want to spend on controls, and how much are you protecting, and what's the risk and reward in terms of doing that. So that's part of the process that we got to undertake, and then try to come up with a recommendation on what we do. And
if, for example, the city manager had a question,
yes,
he would have available the ability to go to the utilities department, go to the payment department, put together a picture of
I think what you're hearing is the utilities is centralizing, so now we got to make sure that the other departments are centralizing the files for at least contracts, and that's what we got to review to make sure that the records are available, because what I think what you heard is that the records were in different locations and different pieces, and some were missing some pieces, and that part of the training is what should be in the file.
So would you be responsible for the other departments reaching the standards that utilities?
We'll do the training. I can't take
Well,
responsibility
let me just speak to this. So this task force that I put together is not just designed to respond to issues in utilities, so it will be across the organization. So both the things that we learn out of this audit and the review there are things that we would intend to, and this is why HR and other folks, Jonathan, are involved, to be able to start to make recommendations about how we do these things. To go to your question, Councilmember Schmidt, about the centralized, I think the problem is that, the real answer to your question is we are not going to have an integrated online system that would allow ASD to be able to go in and look in that regard as to what utilities was keeping. We have an old-fashioned way where I could ask ASD to go over to utilities and take a look at their files to see how things are. Obviously, ultimately, we want to integrate everything in some way to allow those sorts of things, but we don't have them right now. But in the meantime, we want to develop a series of practices that will routinize what the different channels and the connections are, so that if we want to activate something, we don't have to figure it out each time. Yeah.
Yes.
First off, I think that utilities, you are taking this very seriously. This is exactly how I would like to see things have already been managed, but I'm very happy that you are going through and cleaning this up and getting the culture right. Where I have a problem is you hand off to Lalo to get payment paid. So there shouldn't be, if systems and operations are working smoothly, there shouldn't be a lot of time once they're set up. They should actually go quite quickly to, because it should be a nice bundle and a nice package coming from the different departments, not just utilities, if they're operating in a transparent way, so that when you finally do the final approval, because you issue the checks, right, for payment?
Right.
Yeah, so there is this transfer of your package, and then we need to make sure that you're catching it and also having a good system of transparency to be able to immediately push it right back to utilities if the package isn't right. And so are you preparing people to have that kind of authority in your department?
I guess I need more clarity in your comments, because it's kind of general. If you meant if the package that they would have sent us to be able to
For approval,
determine
right.
that it was supposed to be not time and material, no, we won't be able to do
Yeah, I think that's a fair question for me. Am I sending him information on which he is to pay that's accurate? That's on
That's
me.
on you.
And
But there needs to be a way for them to validate whether or not something slipped past you that wasn't right. So that's what I'm trying to
Yeah,
get at.
there's certain elements that I agree with you that we could do. Is it a valid contract, does the invoice?
did we exceed the budget?
Did it add up right? I mean, those sorts of
But
things.
did it meet the contract terms? We won't be able to know that because.
I'm holding my folks totally
But there should be-
responsible for that.
So there's not a way of indicating that on the invoice that it was approved and it was checked against the contract. So there isn't an initialing system. of
There is
some
an
sort.
initialing system.
So you see the initialing system as being initialed off correctly
We-
and completely.
we could do Yes. that.
And
Right.
if you see it, and
Yes.
if you see a gap in the initialing, then you know.
We
to
can do
send it
that,
up.
yes.
So
And I think
that's
that-
all I'm talking
Okay,
about.
good.
I think
You
that
know,
is a
have that
system.
kind of a handoff where you
Okay.
know that she's gone through this
Yeah.
checkpoint.
That's
So-
why
so
we're
on the-
clarification.
yeah.
Those
So
are
I wanna
just
make sure
rubber
I-
stamp mechanisms.
Yeah.
that-
Good.
Okay, thank you.
But the quality control, obviously, on the deliverable has to lay on the department, right? I mean, he's not gonna check if.
Performance, yes.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, just so we're clear, I mean, if they've got an invoice that has 20 tons of gravel that were purchased, ASD is not gonna go back to try to verify, did they actually get 20 tons of gravel?
No, but there
Okay.
should be some mechanism in the bundle that she sends over there that somebody did sign off as saying,
Right, I
yes,
see.
I
Yes.
received that.
Right,
And
exactly.
actually, that is the system today.
Yeah.
I
The library is a
And then
perfect example
you
of
should
that.
be capable, your team should be capable of recognizing that this is all completely crossed and signed off. So that's what I'm.
And can I address an earlier question, Vice Mayor? You were asking about weak scope, and I don't want to respond for the auditor, but I will say this. In terms of scope development for the contracts, Lalo's correct. He will always rely on the experts, and we will claim to be the experts in our area, in our field. And we will, it is a little bit of a learning and iterative process. As perfect as we try to make scopes of work, we'll get better with each contract. This time and materials, minor piece and major piece of fixed bid price items contract was kind of a first and only for this kind of work. At least first and only in our memories. Maybe this was done 30 years ago, we don't know. But anyway, in certainly more reasonable recent history, this is a first and only. We've stopped doing it already. So that was a learning opportunity for us.
Can I just say one thing? I do want to qualify, if that's okay, just so we're clear going forward. Again, my basic view is the responsible department is the responsible department, and the oversight role is, again, can never be as detailed as the responsible department. That being said, I don't want anybody who has oversight to feel that they are disempowered of asking any kind of question that they would want to have in the process of oversight, even dumb questions. And I would not support the experts in the department saying, that's a dumb question, we'll refuse to answer that. You don't know what you're talking about. No, I mean, so it's not so much we're the experts, don't even talk to us. It's more when they get into a dispute, right, which is I think you only need 15 tons of this rather than 20. I mean, then that's absurd. But for them, somebody to ask, would you explain to me really why you really need to do something this way and that sort of thing, we expect to have that back and forth to enough that it doesn't completely delay things happening, but also I do have an expectation that ASD or other oversight departments are going to do their part to keep people on their toes also at times. So.
We reject scopes. We reject requests and sole source requests, for example, because there's only one vendor that said, no, there isn't. So there's a role that we're playing that you're not actively seeing because it's behind the scenes.
No, and I would expect that. I just also would expect that if you have like the invoice that we saw over there, which was just very skimpy, and not tied to anything, how did that get approved for payment? That's what I'm asking. And so, and if all of these things are executed in a way that they can be initialed off, so that you can go back to the party that dropped the ball on one piece of it then you know it's finished, and they will take full responsibility for you issuing the payment that is wrong, you know. But if you don't have that kind of checks and systems when it goes over to you, then it's ambiguous as to who was, well, oh, we had a little powwow at the, you know, at the water cooler, and this is what we decided. And that's what I'm hearing happened with this particular contract, and so, but we're not gonna do that anymore. That's all I care about going forward.
Councilmember Sher.
I'd like to make a motion. The finance committee recommends to the council
Did we finish?
acceptance of contract oversight audit drinking.
Second.
Well, wait, have we finished all of the recommendations?
Yeah,
I think so.
There were similar responses.
And auditors always concurs.
I
Yep. Yep.
And there's a mechanism, I mean, you can just speak for your, Berman, where the auditor's office gives you a status report of where we're at, and what we have done, and what we haven't done.
Whether we met the target dates.
Councilmember Sher.
just like to thank the city auditor for important operating report for his good relations with the city. Look forward to the follow-ups and to talk about the dates. Responses.
And I agree, I think this has been a valuable service by the auditor's department, and I think that the responses are significant and have to be carried out. But if they are carried out, we will have seen much better systems put in place, and that they will apply beyond this particular area. Look forward to hearing the follow-ups.
I concur.
Does this go forward to full council then? This is, yeah, it does.
Yep.
Okay, I wasn't sure what the action was tonight.
Okay.
Okay.
None? All in favor?
Aye.
That passes unanimously. Thank you all very much for bearing with us, but it was an important issue.
Thank you, everyone.
At the fridge.
Yeah. So,
Do you want to do?
we still have just a second before we're, no, fine, thank you. You're free to go, we aren't quite, almost. Future meetings and agenda.
Future meetings, we have the next meeting scheduled on November 19th. Just to make you aware, there are two meetings that night. Both the Finance Committee and the Policy and Services are meeting. So we'll be in the chambers. We'll be talking about fiscal year end, so we're going to bring you the comprehensive annual financial report with the external auditor. And then we're also going to give you the status of the capital program at year end. And that's it on the agenda. Oh, no, I'm sorry, one more item. We are following up what, from Walter's presentation earlier tonight, adopted muni fee schedule changes to comply with Prop 226 and 218. Then on December 3rd would be our next meeting. We have the first quarterly financial results for 14, so we're going to give you the close of 13 on the 19th, then the status of the first quarter on the 3rd. Public Works is coming back with the results of the Palo Alto street sweeping and cleaning program, pilot program. I think you'll be pleased with the results. We're going to also see if we can target to finish the long-range financial forecast by that date. That I can tell you right now that might be a little aggressive, but we'll leave it on for now. And I'm sorry. Okay, and the inventory management audit from the auditor's office it's a maybe. If it's not ready, he's shooting for December 17th.
Okay.
And that's all that's on the agenda.
Thank you. And it's adjourned.
Thank you.
consent. That's all.
Yes, that's all for that.